Chapter 855. Four Symbols Sect, Sect Master's Peak. General Lan, has General Qi returned? Although the 50,000 elite soldiers that had attacked the Four Symbols Sect had not forgotten Qi Weixian's direct subordinates, without the leadership of their own general, the rewards of his troops were far less than Lan Rong's direct subordinate. Therefore, Yu Haoran wanted to make it up to Qi Weixian. Seeing that Yu Haoran had not forgotten Qi Weixian, Lan Rong was deeply moved and hurriedly explained, in reply to the Emperor's son-in-law, General Qi returned half an hour ago. He's now leading 8,000 elite soldiers of his direct subordinates to sweep through the Four Symbols Sect's peak factions. Where's Vice Sect Leader Qian? Lan Rong's explanation did not mention Vice Sect Leader Qian that Qi Weixian was pursuing, so Yu Haoran immediately asked. After all, Vice Sect Leader Qian was also someone who knew the secret of the soul-carrying banner. Dongzi, go and bring Vice Sect Leader Qian's body over. Hearing Yu Haoran's question, Lan Rong hurriedly ordered a lieutenant who was counting the captives. Then, he turned his head and knelt down on one knee to beg for forgiveness. Because he did not complete the mission that the Emperor's son-in-law had ordered, General Qi originally planned to beg for forgiveness in person. However, this subordinate considered the feelings of General Qi's soldiers. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, this subordinate made the decision to let him lead the soldiers to sweep through the spoils of war and appease any dissatisfaction that might arise in the hearts of the soldiers. Without the consent of the Emperor's son-in-law, I used my military power without authorization. I am willing to accept military punishment. General Lan, you did very well. There's no need to beg for forgiveness from me. Yu Haoran smiled and comforted Lan Rong as he reached out to help him up. At the same time, he had made his final decision after leaving the army in the north. Then, he turned his head and ordered Han Guangbei, immediately inform General Qi to come over. Yes. Han Guangbei immediately used his divine sense to inform Qi Weixian. Butcher whose hands are stained with blood, why do you want to destroy our Four Symbols Sect? Just as Yu Haoran was waiting for the four generals to arrive, an extremely beautiful girl suddenly stood up from the bound disciples of the Four Symbols Sect and called out. Logically speaking, it was impossible for him to stand up. However, when Lan Rong saw the girl's appearance, his face immediately darkened as he glared at the elite soldiers responsible for tying him up. General Lan, everyone loves beauty. You don't have to punish them for this trivial matter. Yu Haoran advised with a smile as he reached out and patted Lan Rong, who was about to explode in rage. Prince Consort, this subordinate will definitely discipline them properly after this matter. I guarantee that this subordinate will not make this kind of mistake in the future. Although Yu Haoran didn't make the same mistake as his own elite troops as their commander, he couldn't underestimate the prince's kindness. He quickly knelt on one knee and promised. Shaking his head, Yu Haoran didn't say anything more. He walked up to the girl and asked with a smile. Weren't you questioning me just now as to why I destroyed your Four Symbols Sect, right? Perhaps it was due to her feelings of despair, but when facing Yu Haoran, who even a 9th-grade martial saint expert had to treat with caution, the girl replied without the slightest fear. That's right. Little girl, what I want to tell you is that losers don't have the right to speak, let alone question a general who controls 100,000 soldiers. Yu Haoran's smile was instantly replaced by a gloomy expression as he reprimanded sharply. Faced with Yu Haoran's sudden change in attitude, even though she was affected by her feelings of despair, the girl's instinctive fear made her subconsciously take 2 steps back. Yu Haoran couldn't help but sigh softly when he saw that the girl had been scared away by his sudden change in attitude. His gloomy expression eased a little, and his tone was no longer as harsh as before. Girl, what's your name? Shueli. Perhaps it was because Yu Haoran's harsh reprimand had caused the girl to feel extreme fear, but she obediently answered his question. Shueli, how old are you this year? 18. How did you become a disciple of the Four Symbols Sect? Master passed by my family when he was traveling. After discovering my outstanding talent, he brought me to the Four Symbols sect and became an inner disciple of the Four Symbols sect's Purple Peak Mountain. What's your current cultivation? Peak 9th level martial warrior. When mentioning her cultivation, Shui Li's tone was filled with pride. Have you ever gone out to train? Yu Haoran smiled and continued to ask. Master said that my cultivation is too low, so it's not suitable for me to go out to train. Shui Li said somewhat dejectedly. Yu Haoran didn't go forward to comfort her, nor did he continue to ask. Instead, to everyone's surprise, he suddenly began to talk about his life experience. My surname is Yu, and my name is Haoran. I was born in the Yu family of the Emperor Qin's Pingyang city. Ignoring the puzzled and doubtful faces of the people present, Yu Haoran continued. My father is the patriarch of the Yu family, and my mother is a martial master expert. Thus, when I was 12 years old, I successfully became the heir of the family. But the weather is unpredictable, and the weather is unpredictable. 2 years ago, when I turned 16, my parents were killed in an accident. After losing my parents' protection, the Grand Elder, who regained control of the family's power, not only demoted me to a servant who fetched water and chopped materials, he also forbade me from cultivating any cultivation methods or martial arts. The thousands of generals present from the Emperor Qin's kingdom only knew that Yu Haoran came from a small family in a remote city. They never knew that he had suffered such a miserable and humiliating life. Thus, their puzzled expressions were immediately replaced by sympathy and admiration. At the eastern edge of the plaza, Qin 13, wielding his spear, quietly took out a blank jade slip and used a special secret technique to record Yu Haoran's narration. My life as a servant who fetched water and chopped materials lasted nearly a year, and the humiliation, beatings, and curses I suffered were innumerable. But it was precisely because of this humiliation that I deeply understood a principle. Speaking of this, Yu Haoran looked directly at Shirley, whose eyes were slightly red. In a world where the strong are revered and strength reigns supreme, the fist is the only truth. Reason, humiliation, pleading, and tears always belong to the weak. Shirley, you just asked me why I wanted to destroy your Four Symbols sect, so I'll tell you now. Because our Emperor Qin's kingdom is powerful. Because we want to fulfill our ambition of conquering the world. We will destroy any faction that stands in our way with thunderous might. And your Four Symbols sect is a tiger that stands in the way of our conquest. Thus, we can only destroy you, the tiger in the way. Yu Haoran suddenly took a step forward when he saw the anger in Shirley's eyes. Chapter 856. Four Symbols Sect, Sect Master Peak. Faced with Yu Haoran's questions, Shui Li couldn't help but take 2 more steps back before squatting down and sobbing. The sect that had doted on her, loved her, and nurtured her had been exterminated by Yu Haoran's army. She ought to avenge her sect and master. However, Yu Haoran's humiliating self-narration just now, as well as his naked exposure of the law of survival of the fittest in this world, made her unable to hate or resent this young man who wasn't even as old as her. At this moment, it seemed that crying was the only way to vent her grievances. Shui Li, according to how my Emperor Qin deals with captives, a female disciple with outstanding looks like you will either be given to a meritorious subject as a slave, or your cultivation will be crippled and you will be turned into a military prostitute. As he looked at the sobbing Shui Li, Yu Haoran knew that her heart was close to breaking down. All he needed was one final blow to achieve his goal. Thus, he ignored the sobbing Shui Li and hardened his heart to threaten her. Slave, military prostitute. When she heard that her fate was only these 2 tragic choices, the extreme fear in her heart caused Shui Li's face to instantly pale. She raised her head and looked at Yu Haoran. Her eyes were filled with despair, and there was a trace of begging. Shui Li, this prince consort is not a cold-blooded and bloodthirsty person. I can't bear to see you end up in such a miserable state. The pleading in her eyes told Yu Haoran that this was a desire to live that had emerged from her heart after all despair. If he could give her hope for a new life, then the gratitude she would feel would not be any less than that of saving her life. This was also the result he had hoped to achieve by reprimanding her and recounting his humiliation. So, this prince consort will give you a chance to choose. Xue Li's desire to live expanded without being reduced to a slave or a military prostitute. She dropped to her knees and looked at Yu Haoran with pleading eyes. Recently, Princess Ling Fei plans to form her own Fire Phoenix team. This prince consort can recommend you to participate in the selection, but whether or not you can pass the selection will depend on your own luck and hard work. In fact, Ling Fei's idea of forming her own personal guards had been brought up by Princess Ru Ling, who had come as a guest, not long after the engagement ceremony. As for the original intention of forming the Fiery Phoenix squad and what they wanted to accomplish, Yu Haoran did not know, nor did he want to know. After all, to be able to form a personal guard that completely belonged to her, not only could it reduce her longing for him, but it could also protect her safety. He wholeheartedly approved of it. Of course, if he had only wanted to recommend a genius to Ling Fei, he would not have needed to go through so much trouble, even going so far as to talk about his humiliating experiences in his youth. What Yu Haoran really wanted to achieve was the young disciples with a certain amount of talent and potential in the square. Thank you for your grace, Prince Consort. Thank you for your grace. Even if I have to risk my life, Xue Li will pass the selection held by Her Highness. To be able to become the personal guard of Her Highness the Princess of the Emperor Qin Kingdom, this status and treatment far exceeded that of an inner disciple of a second-rate sect. Faced with Yu Haoran's offer of a choice, Xue Li kowtowed to express her gratitude while expressing her determination. His gaze shifted from Xue Li to the people in the square, and then he slowly rose into the air. When he was about 10 meters above the ground, he stopped and used his soul force to envelop his voice so that his next words could be clearly heard by the thousands of captives in the square. This prince consort has already said that I am not a cold-blooded and bloodthirsty person, and I can't bear to see you geniuses end up being beheaded, or even reduced to slaves. Now, this prince consort will also give you a chance to choose. Xue Li's twists and turns in fate were also affecting the people in the square. This was especially true for the young people with a certain amount of talent and potential. They didn't want to die, and they certainly didn't want to be humiliated as slaves. Thus, when they heard Yu Haoran give them a chance to choose, they immediately looked up at Yu Haoran floating in the air. Female disciples can participate in Princess Ling Fei's selection like Xue Li. Male disciples can choose to join the Northern Army and obtain the status of a true soldier through meritorious service. I'm willing. After Yu Haoran gave them a choice of different fates, the square was immediately filled with fierce responses. In response, Yu Haoran only chuckled before landing next to Lan Rong and the others. Prince Consort, this subordinate is completely convinced by you. Lan Rong sighed as he looked at Yu Haoran's young and tender face. As captives, the influence of hatred and humiliation made it very difficult for these people to submit, let alone become a new source of soldiers for Emperor Qin's kingdom. Under normal circumstances, no more than 10% of the thousands of disciples in the square would be willing to surrender through various threats and promises. Moreover, even after surrendering, there was no guarantee that they would be 100% loyal. However, Yu Haoran's narration and threats had not only successfully resolved the hatred in the hearts of most of the disciples of the Four Symbols sect, but they were also willing to join the army and become soldiers who could bathe in blood. Given the current situation, apart from the elders and deacons, the vast majority of the young disciples would become his loyal subordinates. How could Lan Rong and the others not be completely convinced by this method of turning something rotten into something miraculous? Generals, in any case, this prince consort has already made up his mind. As for how many people you can win over in the end, it'll be up to you. The heartfelt admiration from Lan Rong and the others made Yu Haoran feel great, and he could not help but tease them. Han Qing, you idiot, what are you standing there for? Hurry up and do it. Yu Haoran's teasing reminder made Han Guangbei the first to react. He immediately scolded the officer who was watching from the side. This subordinate obeys. Han Qing immediately came back to his senses from the scolding and the reminder in his eyes. He immediately called for his subordinates, and began to make all sorts of promises and benefits to the disciples who were willing to become soldiers in order to rope them in. Although Lan Rong's reaction was not as fast as Han Guangbei's, most of the soldiers in charge of guarding and counting the captives were on his side. As a result, when they saw Han Qing snatching the disciples who were willing to join the army, there was no need for Lan Rong's reminder. Other than a few elite soldiers guarding the edge of the square, everyone else joined in the struggle. Chapter 857. Four Symbols Sect, Sect Master's Peak. Yu Haoran ignored the chaotic fighting in the plaza as he turned and spoke to the 5 generals. 5 generals, it's all thanks to your help that we were able to successfully break through the 4 Symbols God-gathering formation and destroy the 4 Symbols Sect. Haoran thanks everyone. Yu Haoran thanked them sincerely as he clasped his hands. Emperor's son-in-law, you're too courteous. This is something that we should do, Lan Rong, who was closer to him, said on behalf of everyone. 5 generals, seeing that you've helped me so much, I've decided to take out all the treasures and resources in the 4 Symbols Sect's treasury as a reward, Yu Haoran suggested with a smile as he raised his head to indicate that Lan Rong did not need to be modest. Hearing Yu Haoran's suggestion, Lan Rong and the others could not help but gasp as they looked at him in shock. Even though Yu Haoran and Han Guangbei had already swept through the 4 Symbols Sect's treasury, with Yu Haoran's foresight and Han Guangbei's caution, they had probably only taken away a small portion of the most important treasures. As such, it was unimaginable just how shocking a second-rate sect's collection would be after 10,000 years. Now that Yu Haoran had decided to give all of this to the 5 people present as a reward, how could they not feel shocked? Emperor's son-in-law, this subordinate is extremely grateful for your trust and kindness, but doing this will violate the Great Qin's military laws. Apart from feeling shocked and moved, Lan Rong and the others had to consider Yu Haoran's situation. According to the laws of the Emperor Qin's kingdom, all spoils of war had to be reported to the Ministry of War, the Ministry of Rights, the Ministry of Personnel, and the Court. The Ministry of War, the Ministry of Personnel, and the Ministry of Rights would come up with specific rules based on the merits of the battle, and they would redistribute the spoils based on the merits. However, based on centuries of practice, the Ministry of War, the Ministry of Personnel, and the Ministry of Rights had a conscience if they could give out 10% of the resources they collected as reward. Therefore, no matter how reluctant he was, Lan Rong rejected Yu Haoran's suggestion after briefly communicating with Li Quanqing and the others through his eyes. Are you sure you don't want it? Yu Haoran asked with a frown. We can't harm the prince consort because of a moment of greed, Lan Rong replied firmly. Prince consort, these are the treasures this subordinate picked from the treasury. I will hand them over to you now. Lan Rong and the others' refusal to accept the reward from the treasury made Han Guangbei suddenly think of the merciless military law and the ugly faces of the people from the Ministry of War, the Ministry of Appointments, and the Ministry of Rights. Although there was only him and the prince consort when choosing treasures, as long as the prince consort did not take the initiative to say, then no one had the right to ask if he had touched the treasures in the treasury. However, if he did so, it was very likely that he would bring trouble to Yu Haoran. Therefore, after much consideration, Han Guangbei finally gritted his teeth and took out the treasures and resources he had picked just now to show that he had the same attitude as Lan Rong and the others. Generals, to tell you the truth, even if you don't want the spiritual stones, medicinal herbs, elixirs, cultivation methods, celestial devices, and refining materials in the treasury of the 4 Symbols Sect, I don't plan to hand them over to the imperial court, let alone the Ministry of War, the Ministry of Personnel, and the Ministry of Rights. Han Guangbei's unexpected action reminded Yu Haoran of the Emperor Qin's rule about collecting spoils of war. However, he knew very well that the people from the Ministry of War, the Ministry of Personnel, and the Ministry of Rights were insatiably greedy. How could they be willing to give away the treasures and resources they had worked so hard to get to those people? So, this prince consort will ask you one last time. Do you want the reward in the treasury or not? Yu Haoran put away the smile on his face and asked in a sharp tone. This. Seeing that Yu Haoran was really angry, Lan Rong and the others hesitated. Fine. Although Lan Rong and the others refused to accept the resources in the treasury for their own good, Yu Haoran was still very angry at their indecisiveness. Since you don't want it, I'll destroy it all. Not even a strand of hair will be left for them. I want to see if the Ministry of War, the Ministry of Personnel, and the Ministry of Rights dare to touch me. At this point, Yu Haoran directly rose into the air and headed straight for the treasury. Quick, go and stop the prince consort. Yu Haoran gritted his teeth just now. It was obvious that he was not joking. He probably really wanted to destroy the treasury. Therefore, Lan Rong, who was the first to react, quickly reminded him. Boom! However, just as Lan Rong and the others rose into the air to stop Yu Haoran, they heard a deafening roar from the treasury. This is bad. Lan Rong thought to himself and quickly increased his speed. However, when they arrived in front of the treasury, they discovered that Yu Haoran, who had transformed into a large power King Kong ape, was brandishing his purple rod and smashing it into the treasury. At this moment, looking at the treasury that had been more than half destroyed, Lan Rong and the others immediately revealed expressions of regret. If they had known that the result would be like this, they would have accepted Prince Consort's suggestion from the start. This way they would be able to obtain substantial benefits and also share some of the responsibility for him. Previous chapter. Next chapter. Boom. Following the collapse of the last wall, the Four Symbols sect's treasury that had been erected for 10,000 years was completely turned into a pile of ruins. After dispersing the large power King Kong ape transformation, Yu Haoran, who had returned to the ruins of the treasury, did not stop moving. First, he took out the pill furnace from his storage ring, then used his elemental energy to drive the pill furnace's fire, directly refining the ruined treasury into a pile of ashes. Looking at the ashes of the treasury, Lan Rong immediately recalled Yu Haoran's words before he'd begun his assault. He wouldn't even leave a strand of hair for the Ministry of War, the Ministry of Personnel, and the Ministry of Rights. Withdrawing the pill furnace's fire, Yu Haoran cast a dissatisfied glance at Lan Rong and the others, then soared into the air and returned to the square of the sect head's peak. He scanned the entire square and finally spotted Qin 13 at the edge of the square, wielding an azure spear. Noticing Yu Haoran's gaze, Qin 13 couldn't help but secretly pray that Yu Haoran wouldn't walk toward him and expose his identity. Otherwise, he would have no choice but to leave the army of the north and switch to a new mission. Unfortunately, his prayers weren't answered. Because Yu Haoran, who discovered him, was already walking toward him. Prince Consort. Qin 13 shook his head and called out with a wry smile, stabbing his spear into the hard ground. Although he knew that his current actions were inappropriate and would certainly expose Qin 13's true identity, he was in a bad mood and ignored Qin 13's wry smile. Chapter 858. In the Pavilion of the Sect Master's Residence. Holy son-in-law, can we go somewhere else? Qin 13 couldn't refuse Yu Haoran's tyrannical behavior, so he could only suggest with a wry smile. Come with me. Yu Haoran raised his head and looked at the surroundings. In the end, he chose a pavilion not far away. After giving a reminder, Yu Haoran walked towards the pavilion. Qin 13 couldn't help but sigh when he saw the strange and shocked expressions on the faces of Lan Rong and the others in the center of the square. He followed Yu Haoran into the pavilion. Let's begin. Yu Haoran ordered after Qin 13 entered the pavilion. Upon hearing Yu Haoran's instructions, Qin 13 took out a small and exquisite bell from his sleeve. He channeled his soul force and elemental energy into the bell and gently shook it. However, the bell didn't make any sound. There was only a very weak fluctuation of spatial energy. Yu Haoran, this is a special spatial teleportation magic tool. It's very similar to the storage ring you're using now. Thaling, who'd been awakened by the fluctuations of spatial energy generated by the bell's shaking, observed it with his consciousness and learned the specific structure of the bell in Qin 13's hand. The only difference is that there's a type of celestial crystal inside the bell that can teleport in both directions. It can allow two different spatial magic tools to teleport instantly. Thaling, can you refine a magic tool like this? Yu Haoran asked excitedly when he heard Thaling's relaxed tone. If Thaling could refine a magic tool like this, then he'd be able to contact Ling Fei at any time, no matter where he was. This way, he'd be able to resolve his longing for her and put her at ease. Yu Haoran, as long as you can take out the celestial crystals now, I will refine a teleportation Dharma treasure that is even better than this bell within an hour, the pagoda spirit said mockingly. Then forget it. Hearing Thaling's request, Yu Haoran immediately gave up on the idea of refining a teleportation artifact. After all, heaven crystals were a special kind of crystal that was several hundred times rarer and more precious than space crystals. Not to mention that he could not take it out now, even in his previous life when he had explored so many ruins and forbidden areas, he had never seen even a thumb-sized celestial crystal. Prince Consort, I've already contacted Lord Wan Sui. 3 minutes later, the bell in Qin 13's hand vibrated on its own. He immediately reminded them with a solemn expression. 13, you just need to repeat my words. Yu Haoran took a deep breath after receiving Qin 13's reminder. Your Majesty, I'm in a very bad mood right now, so I took out the treasury of the Four Symbols sect to vent my anger. If the officials from the Ministry of War, the Ministry of Envoys, and the Ministry of Rights want to hold me accountable, Yu Haoran, you'd better stop them. Otherwise, the purple staff in my hand will not recognize anyone. Prince Consort, is this appropriate? Qin 13 asked in trepidation after hearing what Yu Haoran wanted him to repeat. Repeat it to me word for word. Yu Haoran ordered sternly, glaring at him. All right. Qin 13 nodded, closed his eyes, and began to repeat what Yu Haoran had just said. Xianying City, in the study of the Imperial Palace. Lord Wan Sui, isn't Prince Consort going too far? Qin Yi, who was suppressing the dissatisfaction in his heart, immediately complained with an indignant expression after repeating Qin 13's words. Going too far. Emperor Qin was stunned for a moment when he heard Qin Yi's complaint, then explained with relief. This is Prince Consort's temperament. This is the Prince Consort's personality. You just have to get used to it in the future. Then, Emperor Qin shouted outside the study, Steward Jiang. Lord Wan Sui. Steward Jiang immediately entered the study. Ask Marshal Meng to warn the Ministry of War. Ask Prime Minister Yen to warn the Ministry of Appointments and the Ministry of Rights. Tell them not to provoke the Prince Consort. The Qin Emperor ordered. This old servant will arrange for someone to invite Marshal Meng and Prime Minister Yen. Although there were more than 30 princes in the great Emperor Qin Empire, as long as it came from Emperor Qin's mouth, it could only be Yu Haoran. The other princes didn't have this honor at all. Therefore, there was no need for further questioning. Steward Jiang immediately bowed and left the study. After Steward Jiang left the study, Emperor Qin ordered Qin Yi. Qin Yi, tell Prince Consort that the Ministry of War, Ministry of Appointments, and Ministry of Rights will never cause trouble for him. If those people don't listen to Marshal Meng and Prime Minister Yan's warnings, he can do whatever he wants. This emperor will pretend to turn a blind eye. Sect Master Peak Wind Pavilion. After repeating Qin Yi's words, Qin 13 looked at Yu Haoran in shock. He didn't expect that Yu Haoran's rebellious words not only didn't anger the Emperor, but also blocked the trouble from the Ministry of War, Ministry of Appointments, and Ministry of Rights for him. 13. Tell His Majesty that the murderer who abducted Great General Gu Yu is a seven-tailed white fox from the Green Hill Fox clan. Ignoring Qin 13's shocked expression, Yu Haoran continued. After dealing with the Four Symbols sect, I will hunt down that seven-tailed white fox and see if I can rescue Great General Gu Yu. Prince Consort, are you sure that the murderer who abducted the Great General is a seven-tailed white fox from the Green Hill Fox clan? Qin 13 asked with some excitement. As a spy planted by Emperor Qin in the Northern Army, Qin 13 had to monitor the movements of the dozen or so generals in the Northern Army to prevent any of them from betraying the army. His most important task was to protect the army. Ever since Gu Yu was abducted by an inexplicable woman, Qin 13 had been investigating the woman's origins, but he hadn't found any clues. This made him feel both guilty and angry. This Prince Consort never lies. Yu Haoran promised, glaring at Qin 13 with dissatisfaction. Prince Consort, when you go after that seven-tailed white fox, can you take this subordinate with you? Ignoring Yu Haoran's dissatisfied glare, Qin 13 asked solemnly. What are you going to do? Yu Haoran asked, puzzled. This subordinate is going to skin that fox and pull out its tendons, Qin 13 said through gritted teeth. Ever since Great General Gu Yu went missing, Qin 13 had been unable to find any clues about his opponent. Although His Majesty and Qin Yi didn't blame him, he had been blaming himself in his heart. He wanted to track down his opponent and give His Majesty, Qin Yi, and himself an explanation. All right. Yu Haoran nodded, sensing Qin 13's hatred for the seven-tailed white fox. Chapter 859. Xianyang City, in the study of the Imperial Palace. Bang! Damned seven-tailed Arctic fox, this Emperor will destroy your Green Hill Fox clan sooner or later. After hearing Qin Yi's retelling of Yu Haoran's words, Emperor Qin, who was enraged, slammed his left hand on the desk. With a powerful sound, the hard pear-wood desk was directly torn apart. Steward Jiang, who heard the sound, hurriedly entered the study to take a look, then immediately retreated. In less than 3 minutes, an identical pear-wood desk was placed in front of Emperor Qin. After a few minutes of adjustment, Emperor Qin, who had temporarily suppressed his anger, ordered Qin Yi, ask the Prince Consort if he needs my help. Your Majesty, the Prince Consort said that he will only take 13 with him. Qin Yi, who received Yu Haoran's reply from Qin 13's retelling, hurriedly replied. In fact, with the Prince Consort's methods, as long as he doesn't encounter a quasi-martial supremacy who has passed the second-layer tribulation, no one can do anything to him. After hearing Qin Yi's retelling, Emperor Qin muttered to himself. Then, he raised his head and ordered Qin Yi. Qin Yi, tell the Prince Consort that he must hunt down that seven-tailed Arctic fox. This Emperor wants to see the fox, dead or alive. Sect Master Peak Wind Pavilion. 13. Tell His Majesty that this Prince Consort can only promise to do his best. It had been so long since Gu Yu had been abducted. Who knew where the seven-tailed Arctic fox was hiding? What if she returned to the Green Hill Fox clan in fear after learning that the Four Symbols sect had been destroyed? Would he be able to chase her all the way to the Green Hill mountain range? Prince Consort, His Majesty asks you to do your best. Qin 13 slightly changed the tone of his retelling and risked a reminder. The reason why he took the risk of changing the tone of his retelling was that Qin 13 found that Yu Haoran didn't seem to be very enthusiastic about hunting down the seven-tailed Arctic fox. This made Qin 13, who was bent on capturing the seven-tailed Arctic fox alive and giving Emperor Qin and Qin Yi an explanation, give up. Therefore, he could only take a risk and give it a try. Fortunately, Yu Haoran did not notice his abnormality and only nodded, indicating that he would do his best. Then, he continued. 13. Tell His Majesty that Ji Qingyu of the Northern Army has repeatedly offended this prince consort. He even violated military law to provoke this prince consort. That's why I'm going to make an example out of Ji Qingyu. Prince consort, Ji Qingyu's younger sister, is the emperor's most beloved concubine. It seems that she will be conferred the title of empress in a few days. Look. Upon hearing that Yu Haoran planned to make an example out of Ji Qingyu, Qin 13 couldn't help but warn him. He knew Ji Qingyu's background and knew the situation in the capital at all times. 13. You should know my personality. Ji Qingyu's sister hasn't been crowned empress yet. Even if she was, I'd still kill Ji Qingyu. Yu Haoran said fearlessly when he heard Qin 13's warning. All right. Seeing that Yu Haoran had made up his mind, Qin 13 didn't warn him anymore. He repeated his words to Qin Yi through the bell in his hand. Xianyang City, in the study of the Imperial Palace. Upon hearing that Yu Haoran planned to make an example out of Ji Qingyu, Emperor Qin fell silent. After nearly 3 minutes of silence, he raised his head and shouted outside the study. Steward Jiang! Emperor! Has the imperial edict conferring Ji Qingyu the title of empress been issued? Emperor Qin asked. Replying to Emperor, it has been stamped with the imperial seal. It will be announced to the world tomorrow morning. Steward Jiang, who was in charge of drafting the imperial edict, immediately replied. Burn the imperial edict. Don't mention the conferment of empress in the future. Emperor Qin ordered coldly. After Steward Jiang left the study, Qin Yi pondered for a long time. In the end, he let out a long sigh and said nothing. At this moment, he could already see that Emperor Qin's regard and love for his son-in-law had exceeded the ordinary father-son-in-law relationship, even surpassing the relationship between father and son. The two seemed to be in a position of complete equality. Fortunately, Yu Haoran wasn't the imperial son of the Grand Qin Empire. Otherwise, with the emperor's high regard and favor towards him, there wouldn't be the slightest suspense in the competition for the throne. After dealing with the empress affairs, Emperor Qin thought of the Ji family, who had deep influence in the military. He was worried that they would secretly send people to ambush Yu Haoran. In the end, he decided to take the responsibility himself. Qin Yi, prepare the imperial edict. The Qin emperor instructed Qin Yi as he stood up and picked up the wolf fur on the table. After Qin Yi laid out the imperial edict, Emperor Qin closed his eyes and mobilized the power of law he had just overcome. When he opened his eyes again, he wrote the word behead on the yellow silk. Have 13 hand the imperial edict directly to Ji Qingyu. Emperor Qin ordered after returning the wolf fur to its original place and sitting back on the dragon throne. Yes. After rolling up the imperial edict, Qin Yi used the bell in his hand to transmit the edict to Qin 13. Sect Master Peak, Wind Pavilion. Emperor Qin Yi, do you think this subordinate should deliver the imperial edict to Ji Qingyu now or continue to listen to your orders? Qin 13 asked respectfully after receiving the imperial edict from the bell. Wait a moment. Yu Haoran shook his head. I only have one more thing to do now, and I need His Majesty to give me a decree. Qin 13 put away the imperial edict and immediately assumed a posture of listening attentively. 13. Now that the Four Symbols concentration formation has been broken and the Four Symbols sect has been destroyed, ask His Majesty if he should arrange for someone to take over the Northern Army. After all, this Emperor's son-in-law still has his own matters to attend to, Yu Haoran said, as if intending to hand over power. Emperor Qin Yi, are you sure? Qin 13 asked in disbelief. Of course. Yu Haoran nodded affirmatively. Emperor Qin Yi, the Northern Army's 100,000 elite soldiers are very strong. They can be said to be Emperor Qin's most elite army. Are you really willing to give them up? Qin 13 asked, still in disbelief. 13. This emperor's son-in-law's ambition is not in the army. Even if 1,000,000 elite soldiers were under my command, this emperor's son-in-law wouldn't be moved, let alone 100,000 elite soldiers, Yu Haoran explained with a smile. Seeing that Yu Haoran wasn't greedy for power in the army, Qin 13 sincerely admired him. Emperor Qin Yi, there are very few people in this world that I, Qin 13, admire. Apart from the emperor and Qin Yi, you are the third. Xianying City, Imperial Palace Study. Emperor Qin Yi, you're an amazing man. After repeating Yu Haoran's words, Qin Yi also sighed in admiration, just like Qin 13. Qin Yi, now you know why I think so highly of and dote on the emperor's son-in-law. Emperor Qin, who was equally happy in his heart, said with a smile. This subordinate understands. Qin Yi nodded her head sincerely. Tapping his fingers on the table, Emperor Qin began to consider who could take over the northern army. But no matter how much he thought about it, he couldn't find a suitable candidate. In fact, it wasn't that there wasn't a suitable candidate. The main reason was that after breaking the Four Symbols concentration formation and wiping out the Four Symbols sect, the Northern Army's campaign would be smooth sailing for a long time. Whoever took over the Northern Army at this time would get this great merit for free. As for the few suitable candidates, Emperor Qin didn't want them to get this easy military merit out of thin air and gain more power. Therefore, after finding no suitable candidates, Emperor Qin finally asked for Yu Haoran's opinion. Chapter 860. I owe a chapter yesterday. No need to explain, I'll make up for it. Sect Master Peak, Wind Pavilion. After listening to Qin 13's recount of Emperor Qin's request for his opinion on a candidate to take over the Northern Army, Yu Haoran thought for a moment, then took out a blank jade slip from his storage ring. He recorded his preferred candidate and the reasons for his recommendation in detail. 13. Deliver this jade slip to His Majesty. Yu Haoran instructed after tossing the jade slip to Qin 13. After receiving the jade slip and using the bell in his hand to teleport to the Imperial Palace in Xianying, Qin 13 waited with Yu Haoran for a while. 1 minute later, as the bell in his hand began to ring, Qin 13 took out an imperial edict from it and respectfully presented it to Yu Haoran. Emperor's son-in-law, His Majesty has written down the candidate to take over the Northern Army. Taking the imperial edict from Qin 13, Yu Haoran opened it and glanced at it. A gratified smile immediately appeared on his face. Then, he put away the imperial edict in his hand and waved at Lan Rong and the others in the square. 13. Let's go. When Lan Rong's group of 6 arrived at the pavilion, Yu Haoran gestured to Qin 13 and took to the air, heading straight for the entrance of the Four Symbols sect. Following closely behind Yu Haoran, Han Guangbei approached Qin 13 and asked in a low voice, "My lord, who are you? Don't ask about my background if you don't want to die." Qin 13 warned in a voice brimming with murderous intent as he turned to look coldly at Han Guangbei. His cold gaze made Han Guangbei feel as if his soul had been plunged into an ice cellar. He couldn't help but shudder. Then, he took a few steps back in horror, distancing himself from Qin 13. "General Han, His Majesty is right. Try not to pry too much into things you shouldn't know." The indifference in Qin 13's eyes when he warned Han Guangbei told Lan Rong that the man's background must be quite astonishing. Lan Rong kindly reminded Han Guangbei out of consideration for the fact that they were both under the emperor's son-in-law. "I know." Nodding, Han Guangbei said with lingering fear. "Ji Qingyu, do you know your crime?" When they arrived at the entrance of the Four Symbols sect, not only did Ji Qingyun not bring his direct descendants to guard the sect, but he had instead ordered his subordinates to bring over a table and a chair. Afterwards, he placed a few types of spiritual fruits on the table. He was currently drinking happily and humming a little tune. He seemed to be at ease. Before Ji Qingyu could say anything, Qin 13, who had suddenly sped up to Ji Qingyu, demanded harshly, Ji Qingyu picked up an 8th grade 9th rank purple cloud fruit and tossed it into his mouth. After chewing and swallowing, he looked up at Qin 13 and asked in a disdainful tone, "Who do you think you are? What qualifications do you have to question this general? How?" Ji Qingyu's arrogant Ji Qingyu was to provoke 13ths for him to be for his to speak for his majesties. At the same time, an aura rose from 13th's body. It was a powerful aura that could shake the heavens and earth. Although Yu Haoran knew that Qin 13 was very strong as a peak 9th level martial saint, perhaps possessing the strength of a quasi-martial exalt who had achieved perfection in the realm of laws, it was only when he truly displayed his aura that Yu Haoran discovered that he was even stronger than he had imagined. The law of edge. I didn't expect this person to be able to comprehend such an obscure law. Thaling, who'd also been awakened by Qin 13's powerful aura, carefully sensed the law power contained in the aura and exclaimed in surprise. Thaling, the law of edge. Compared to the law of slaughter, which one is superior? When Thaling pointed out the type of law Qin 13 had comprehended, Yu Haoran suddenly recalled the handsome Azura he'd created with the law of slaughter back in Xianyang City when he faced Wang Xian of the Wang family. Yu Haoran, the law of edge definitely can't compare to the law of slaughter. That's because the law of slaughter is a superposition of the law of slaughter and the law of slaughter. The law of edge, on the other hand, is only a single law. Thaling explained in detail to Yu Haoran's questions. However, if this kid can comprehend the law of benefit or the law of light and superposition them, his strength will probably surpass that of the Wang family's ancestor. I see. After listening to Thaling's explanation, Yu Haoran understood the reason for Qin 13's strength. He was also filled with boundless expectations for the law power he'd comprehend in the future. He attached even more importance to it. After all, superposition of laws also varied in strength. So powerful. Han Guangbei, who'd been a little unconvinced at first, exclaimed in admiration after sensing the terrifying aura rising from Qin 13's body. Yeah. Lan Rong nodded in agreement. He couldn't help but smile bitterly in his heart. He'd finally remembered Qin 13's origins. Of course, it wasn't Qin 13's true origins, but his identity as a soldier of the Northern Army. When he recalled the order he'd given Qin 13 as a patrolman to patrol the barracks, Lan Rong couldn't help but smile wryly. He was also a little worried that Qin 13 might hold a grudge against him. "How dare you? Do you know who I am?" Ji Qingyu roared angrily after being forced to sit on the ground by Qin 13's powerful aura. "Aren't you just an ordinary general of the Northern Army?" Qin 13 continued to exert pressure with his aura while replying disdainfully. "That's right, I'm just an ordinary general, but I come from the Ji family of Xianyang City. My sister is the Emperor's favorite concubine and has been conferred the title of Empress." Since he couldn't resist Qin 13's powerful aura, Ji Qingyu gave up and crawled on the ground to threaten him. "Offending me is the same as offending Her Majesty. Offending Her Majesty is the same as offending the Emperor. You're dead, kid." "Ji Qingyu, I forgot to tell you that the Emperor has just revoked the edict conferring your sister consort Ji." Faced with Ji Qingyu's threat, Qin 13 suddenly retracted his powerful aura and spoke in a mocking tone. "You're lying." Ji Qingyu shot to his feet and retorted loudly. "I received a message from my family yesterday. The imperial edict conferring my sister the Empress has already been sealed with the imperial jade seal. No one but His Majesty can change the imperial decree." "Is that so?" Qin 13 retorted with a sneer. He took out an imperial edict from his storage ring and waved it at Ji Qingyu. "Ji Qingyu, do you know what this is?" Chapter 861. In front of the Four Symbols Sect. An imperial edict. As Ji Qingyu answered, he sensed that something wasn't quite right. The fact that this expert in ordinary soldier's garb could obtain an imperial edict meant that he was somehow connected to the emperor. Considering the strength he'd just displayed and Emperor Qin's control over the military, a frightening thought came to mind. Ji Qingyu, kneel and receive the edict. Qin 13 saw the change in Ji Qingyu's expression clearly. It wasn't until Qin 13 took out the imperial edict that Qin 13 guessed his true identity. How could someone with such a slow reaction and an arrogant personality act so domineeringly? If Ji Qingyu continued to stay in the army, he'd be a disaster. Qin 13 wholeheartedly approved of Yu Haoran's decision to make an example out of Ji Qingyu. Ji Qingyu received the edict. Having guessed Qin 13's identity, Ji Qingyu didn't dare continue his arrogance and hurriedly knelt to receive the edict. This subject, Ji Qingyu, receives the edict. There was no need for Qin 13 to read the edict aloud. A golden character slowly appeared on the edict he'd just opened. After leaving the edict, the character slowly floated into the air. Then, the character began to twist and distort, finally condensing into a sacred sword exuding intense murderous intent. Unpardonable, execute! A dignified voice boomed when the sacred sword was fully formed. Immediately after, the sacred sword quickly appeared above Ji Qingyu's head. Just as he was about to open his mouth to beg for mercy, the sacred sword directly cut off his head and destroyed his soul. Generally, have someone collect Ji Qingyu's body and send it back to the Ji clan in Xianyang City. After killing Ji Qingyu with the sacred sword, Yu Haoran couldn't help but sigh. He then turned his head and ordered Li Quanqing behind him. Understood. Li Quanqing acknowledged with a sigh. Although he and Ji Qingyu weren't exactly on good terms, and they'd often quarreled over petty gains, he couldn't help but sigh when he saw the enemy he'd quarreled with for decades suddenly killed. Baiguang, summon the other 5 generals. I have an important announcement to make. When Li Quanqing arranged for his subordinates to collect Ji Qingyu's corpse, Yu Haoran instructed Han Guangbei. Yes. Han Guangbei responded and immediately informed Wu Fanghua and the others through divine thought. When Wu Fanghua and the others arrived at the Four Symbols sect and saw the corpses being carried away, a sliver of worry appeared in their eyes. Looking up at the 11 generals in front of the Four Symbols sect, Yu Haoran took a deep breath, took out the imperial edict Qin 13 had sent him via the bell, and slowly unfolded it. When they saw Yu Haoran take out the imperial edict, Qin 13, Lan Rong, and the other soldiers all knelt down on one knee or both and respectfully shouted, "Long live the Emperor!" Although he knew that the imperial edict in Yu Haoran's hand listed the candidate who would take over the position of Great General, Qin 13 didn't know who the candidate would be. He looked at Yu Haoran expectantly. Lan Rong and the others, who didn't know the contents of the imperial edict at all, looked puzzled. Looking up at the puzzled Lan Rong, Yu Haoran gestured with a smile. Lan Rong received the imperial edict. Ah! Lan Rong, who hadn't been mentally prepared, was stunned for a moment. But at Han Guangbei's reminder, Lan Rong hurriedly got up, took 3 steps forward, and knelt down to receive the edict. This subject, Lan Rong, receives the imperial edict. By the will of the heavens, His Majesty decrees. Tiger General Lan Rong, loyal, brave, and resourceful. He is conferred the title of Great General Zhichong and will command 100,000 soldiers on the northern front. Lan Rong raised his head to look at Yu Haoran. His eyes were slightly red as he thanked Yu Haoran. This subject thanks Your Majesty for your grace. General Lan, I hope you can lead 100,000 elite soldiers on the northern front to the border between the 2 realms and fulfill His Majesty's initial wish of unifying the southern region. When Yu Haoran handed the imperial edict to Lan Rong, he also gave him his blessings. Holy son-in-law, words cannot express my gratitude for your great kindness. In the future, everything will depend on this subordinate's actions. Although Lan Rong didn't say anything about swearing loyalty, his resolute expression expressed his true gratitude to Yu Haoran. Yuhaoran reached out and patted Lan Rong on the shoulder. He took the opportunity to pass a storage ring to Lan Rong and reminded him with his divine thought. General Lan, before I destroyed the treasury of the Four Symbols sect, I had already stored all the treasures in the treasury into this storage ring. His Majesty has helped me settle the matter with the Ministry of War, the Ministry of Appointments, and the Ministry of Rights, so you can boldly accept it without worry. I've divided the treasures in the storage ring into 7 portions. Apart from General Qi Weixian, who received 2 portions, each of you will receive 1. After reminding Lan Rong, Yuhaoran nodded at Qin 13 and soared into the sky, leaving the Four Symbols sect without a trace of hesitation. Qin 13 glanced at Lan Rong, then also took to the air to catch up to Yuhaoran. Generals, please follow me to the Great Hall on the main peak of the Four Symbols sect. When he saw Yuhaoran leave the Four Symbols sect without saying goodbye, Lan Rong knew that this was an opportunity for him to take over the army on the northern front. Therefore, Lan Rong, who was holding the imperial edict in his hand, ordered with a strong sense of authority. After flying away from the Four Symbols sect, Yuhaoran turned back to the army camp. Then, he began to chase after the 7-tailed white fox that had abducted General Gu Yu based on the lingering presence in the camp. Qin 13 didn't question Yuhaoran's strange behavior. Instead, he followed closely, hoping to lock onto the 7-tailed Arctic fox as soon as possible. Perhaps the 7-tailed white fox thought too highly of herself, or perhaps she was delayed by some matters, but Yuhaoran managed to catch up to the 7-tailed white fox's exact location after chasing for less than 3,000 miles based on the lingering smell in the air. Rumble! Yuhaoran frowned and reminded Qin 13 when he saw the majestic waterfall that seemed like the Milky Way descending from the 9 heavens. 13. The 7-tailed Arctic fox's presence has disappeared due to the waterfall in front of us. Holy son-in-law, do you have any other methods of pursuit? Qin 13 asked anxiously. Don't worry. Yuhaoran turned his head to indicate for Qin 13 to calm down and continued his explanation. Although the 7-tailed Arctic fox's presence has disappeared, I've analyzed the residual scent at the scene. She should have arrived at the waterfall half an hour ago. Therefore, you'll need to use your powerful consciousness to search a radius of several hundred kilometers and see if you can find any trace of the 7-tailed Arctic fox. Holy son-in-law, please wait a moment. Chapter 862. In front of the waterfall. Thaling, given that 7-tailed white fox's cunning and cautious personality, I'm worried that 13 won't be able to accurately track her down. I'll have to trouble you to use your consciousness to help me track her down. While Qin 13 was using his consciousness to track the 7-tailed white fox, Yuhaoran hurriedly asked for help from the Thaling in his sea of consciousness. All right. The Thaling responded with a simple word, then immediately released the consciousness of a peak 9th rank martial sovereign and began scanning for any movement within a radius of 500 li. 5 minutes later, Qin 13 withdrew his consciousness and shook his head in disappointment. Just as he was about to say something, the Thaling in his sea of consciousness suddenly reminded him. Yuhaoran, go straight into the waterfall. 13, come with me. Without asking about the situation behind the Thaling waterfall, Yuhaoran hurriedly reminded Qin 13. Then, mustering all the energy in his body, he charged straight into the torrential waterfall in front of him. Without the slightest hesitation, Qin 13 not only chased after him, but also used his powerful strength to block the torrential waterfall for him, allowing him to easily pass through the waterfall and appear in the cave behind it. How is this possible? As soon as he steadied himself, Yuhaoran was stunned by the black iron rod embedded in a cyan rock in front of him. This was because the black iron rod embedded in the cyan rock was the Like My Intentions rod that had chosen to leave him in the spirit mist created by the high-grade rank 5 spirit vein in the Blue Moon Hidden Realm. What's wrong, son-in-law? Qin 13 asked in confusion when he saw Yuhaoran's expression change abruptly at the sight of an ordinary iron rod in front of him. Nothing. Taking a deep breath, Yuhaoran casually replied, then strode up to the black iron rod and asked in a complicated tone, "Like my intentions, rod. As I wish. How have you been?" If he hadn't brought it out from the law enforcement peak's vault and used the ape's blood essence to stimulate its dormant consciousness, it would probably still be an ordinary iron rod without any consciousness. However, it was precisely because he had awakened a trace of its instincts from its dormant consciousness that he had obtained the combat consciousness of the Monkey Clan's demon emperor in the near ancient times. Thus, he had grasped the sky-facing staff strike that could unleash the power of a quasi-martial venerable. That was why his feelings were so complicated when he faced the what-I-thought rod. In the face of Yuhaoran's interrogation, the as-I-wish rod, which was like an ordinary iron rod, shook slightly, and then a golden light shot directly into his sea of consciousness. After spending a period of time together, Yuhaoran knew that if you like me would not hurt him for the time being. Therefore, in the face of the rapidly approaching golden light, he did not dodge and allowed the golden light to enter his sea of consciousness. The golden light that fused into the sea of consciousness immediately turned into a majestic golden armored ape wearing golden armor, a golden crown on its head, a golden staff in its hand, and cloud shoes on its feet, overturning rivers and seas. The golden armored ape roared. Together with the golden staff in its hand, it instantly split into hundreds and thousands of golden armored apes. Then, they launched an identical attack at several points in the void of his sea of consciousness. As the golden light fused into his sea of consciousness, it was closely connected to his soul. Therefore, every step of the golden armored ape's staff technique and every process of the demonic power circulation were deeply imprinted in his mind. After the golden armored ape finished the overturning rivers and seas staff technique, Yuhaoran took the opportunity to master this powerful staff technique that was not inferior to the sky-facing staff strike. As I wish, rod, it seems like you have made your final choice. After the golden armored ape finished performing the overturning rivers and seas staff technique, it turned back into a golden light. After it had completely fused into his consciousness, Yuhaoran opened his eyes. Looking at the staff that was still in the shape of an ordinary iron staff, Yuhaoran already knew its choice. He also understood that the staff technique it had just bestowed upon him was to completely sever all ties between them. Therefore, even though he'd accepted the overturning rivers and seas staff technique that wasn't inferior to the sky-facing staff strike, Yuhaoran didn't show any gratitude. In that case, you and I will be strangers from now on. After reminding Qin 13, he used a movement technique and dashed into the depths of the cave. 13. The seven-tailed Arctic fox is at the end of the cave. Qin 13 turned to look at the staff, a trace of confusion flashing through his eyes. However, he didn't pursue the matter and immediately sped up to catch up to Yuhaoran. The cave passage behind the waterfall was very deep. It only took nearly 10 minutes for Yuhaoran to reach the end of the cave. As soon as he steadied himself, a rich spirit energy mixed with the aroma of spirit fruits assailed his nostrils. Yuhaoran, your opportunity has come. Thaling reminded him with a smile just as Yuhaoran was trying to identify the specific type of spirit fruit through the aroma mixed with the spirit energy. Thaling, do you know the origin of the spirit fruit at the end of the cave? Yuhaoran asked in pleasant surprise. When the primordial world was first created, the chaos gave birth to 3 unique spirit trees. Thaling didn't immediately answer Yuhaoran's question. Instead, it explained with a yearning expression. The first is a unique wind and thunder spirit tree. The wind and thunder spirit tree blossoms once every 1,000,000 years, bears fruit once every 1,000,000 years, and ripens once every 1,000,000 years. One is the wind fruit, and the other is the thunder fruit. It allows one to break through to the martial god realm and become a primordial great god without any restrictions. Sizzle! Although the growth cycle of the wind and thunder spirit tree was too long, a wind fruit or a thunder fruit could allow one to see through the mystery of life and death and attain the martial god realm of immortality. Such a heaven-defying effect made Yuhauran gasp as he couldn't help but ask, "Thaling, do you know the whereabouts of the wind and thunder spirit tree?" If he could obtain the wind and thunder fruits, then he would be able to fly together with Qin Lingfei and never be separated. "I do." What made Yuhauran even more surprised was that Thaling actually knew the whereabouts of the wind and thunder spirit tree. "Thaling, where is it?" His voice trembled as he asked. "In a dream," Thaling replied teasingly. "Thaling, don't joke around," Yuhauran complained with some dissatisfaction. "Yuhauran, think about it. With the current environment, it is extremely difficult to break through to the martial honorable realm. How could the rules of heaven allow such a heaven-defying existence like the wind and thunder spirit tree to exist?" Sensing the dissatisfaction in Yuhauran's tone, Thaling stopped joking and told him the truth. When the primordial world was destroyed, the wind and thunder spirit tree was completely destroyed. Sigh. Hearing that the wind and thunder spirit tree had been destroyed, Yuhauran couldn't help but sigh. Then, he remembered that Thaling had mentioned that there were 3 unique spirit trees and continued to ask, "Thaling, what are the other 2 spiritual roots?" Chapter 863. Behind the waterfall, at the end of the cave. The second type of spiritual tree is also a unique ginseng fruit tree. It blooms once every 100,000 years, bears fruit once every 100,000 years, and ripens once every 100,000 years. When the fruits ripen, there will be 36 of them. It ignores all restrictions. One ginseng fruit can allow one to break through to Emperor Wu's realm and enjoy a long lifespan, Thaling continued to explain. "Thaling, there's no need to ask. The ginseng fruit tree must have been destroyed, right?" With the strong impact of the wind and thunder spiritual tree, Yuhauran was not only calm in the face of the ginseng fruit tree that could only help one break through to Emperor Wu's realm, but he was also in the mood to tease Thaling. "That's right. It was destroyed at the same time as the wind and thunder spiritual tree." Nodding his head, Thaling confirmed and continued to explain the origin of the third type of spiritual tree. The third type of spiritual tree is called the peaches of immortality. There are 3 of them, and each of them bears 12 peaches. It blooms once every 10,000 years, bears fruit once every 10,000 years, and ripens once every 10,000 years. When the fruits ripen, there will be 36 of them. It also ignores all restrictions. One peaches of immortality can allow one to break through to Martial Honorable's realm and enjoy a long lifespan of 5,000 years. Thaling, there's no need to ask. The peaches of immortality were destroyed in ancient times, just like the wind and thunder spiritual tree and the ginseng fruit tree, Yuhauran said calmly. Yes and no. However, Thaling gave a different answer this time. "Thaling, what do you mean?" Yuhauran quickly asked. "Since the peaches of immortality are not unique, it has the possibility of being transplanted and revived. In ancient times, human martial artists were at their peak. There was a female powerhouse whose cultivation and strength were comparable to the ancient divine beast king. This powerhouse obtained a peaches of immortality's core by accident. Then, she used the source of life to cultivate it and finally succeeded in reviving the peaches of immortality." At this point, Thaling's tone could not help but reveal a hint of admiration as he continued to narrate. Although the revived peaches of immortality's peaches do not have the heaven-defying effect of helping one break through to Martial Honorable's realm in ancient times, they still have the effect of helping one's cultivation. There are a total of 365 peach trees that were resurrected by that ancient expert. 100 years to bloom, 100 years to bear fruit, and 100 years to ripen. There are 4,380 ripe fruit. It also ignores all restrictions. A single peach of immortality can directly increase one's cultivation by 100 years. Thaling glanced at Yuhauran through his knowledge sea and used him as an example. Yuhauran, your current cultivation is at early 3rd grade Martial King, and your physical body is at early 6th grade Martial King. If I consume a peach of immortality, my cultivation will instantly reach the peak of 7th grade Martial King, and my physical body will also reach the peak of 9th grade Martial King. At this point, Thaling's spiritual sense looked towards the end of the cave, where the spirit chi had completely vaporized. His voice was filled with excitement. Moreover, using the peaches of immortality to increase your strength doesn't have any side effect. You just need some time to consolidate your strength. Thaling, could the fruity fragrance at the end of the cave have something to do with the peach of immortality? After more than a year of contact, Yuhauran understood Thaling's personality very well. He knew that he wouldn't mention the 3 ancient spirit trees for no reason. Since he emphasized the peach of immortality, there must be a deeper meaning behind it. Thus, Yuhauran couldn't help but speculate. That's right. There just so happens to be a ripe peach of immortality left behind from ancient times at the end of the cave. Moreover, the 7-tailed white fox is also under the tree, Thaling confirmed with a smile. 13. I've already found the 7-tailed white fox. After receiving confirmation from Thaling, Yuhauran suppressed his joy and turned to Qin 13. Holy son-in-law, there's no need for you to do it yourself. Leave the 7-tailed white fox to me. The spear in his hand trembled slightly. The ordinary spear that looked like it was made of black iron immediately gave off the aura of a Saint Realm weapon. All right. Nodding in agreement, Yuhauran strode across the end of the cave and entered the extremely spacious space at the end. Although the spiritual chi of heaven and earth was so dense that it had completely vaporized, it didn't affect Yuhauran and Qin 13, who were martial kings and martial saints respectively. According to Thaling's reminder, they'd only been in the space for 10 minutes when Yuhauran saw a peach tree that wasn't very tall, but its branches and leaves were filled with boundless mysteries. Yuhauran's attention was drawn to bowl-sized peaches hanging from its branches. On the other hand, Qin 13's attention was drawn to the small white fox with 7 giant tails standing under the tree. White fox, your time of death has come. In Qin 13's opinion, the 7-tailed Arctic fox had to be the culprit who'd abducted Great General Gu Yu just by following the lingering presence of the camp all the way to the cave behind the waterfall 2,000 kilometers away. Because its attention had been drawn to the peaches on the tree, it hadn't noticed Yuhauran and Qin 13 entering the space at the end of the cave. The 7-tailed Arctic fox jumped in fright when Qin 13's shout rang out. But when it turned around and saw that Qin 13 was wearing Emperor Qin's military uniform, it immediately understood why he was after it. It looks like you want to avenge Gu Yu. The fox didn't panic in the slightest in the face of Qin 13's swift charge. Instead, it grinned as it swung its 7 giant tails. Damned white fox, you really are General Gu Yu's murderer. Qin 13 immediately sped up his attacks when he heard the fox admit that it had abducted Gu Yu. Grinning at Qin 13, the fox's 7 giant tails swung faster and faster. Immediately after, countless pink smoke spurted out from the 7 swaying tails, instantly filling the surroundings. 13. Be careful. This is the secret technique the fox used to seduce General Gu Yu. Yuhauran warned Qin 13 loudly as he motioned for the tower genie to set up a defensive barrier with his consciousness when he saw the 7-tailed Arctic fox's pink smoke. Holy son-in-law, this subordinate is fine. Just take care of yourself. Qin 13's unusually calm voice sounded from within the pink smoke just as Thaling finished setting up the barrier. Thaling comforted him at the same time. Don't worry, Yuhauran. Although the 7-tailed Arctic fox's pink smoke can bewitch the vast majority of men in this world, there are still a small number of men who can resist the temptation. Qin 13, who's comprehended the law of edge, is one of them. As soon as Thaling finished speaking, the seven-tailed Arctic fox's pained cries rang out from within the pink smoke. Chapter 864. In the space at the end of the cave, when Yuhauran saw that Qin 13's spear had pierced the seven-tailed white fox's chest, he realized that it was only heavily injured and not truly dead. Things weren't looking good for it. He immediately flashed to Qin 13's side and warned him in a seemingly friendly manner. 13. The seven-tailed Arctic fox is sinister and cunning. It has many tricks up its sleeve. To prevent any accidents, you'd better destroy its soul. In truth, he was worried that a living seven-tailed Arctic fox might expose the secret of the soul-severing banner and cause unnecessary trouble. Thank you, holy son-in-law. Qin 13 immediately nodded and shook his spear, extinguishing the seven-tailed Arctic fox's life force and soul. Even with his superior mental state and special training in the art of seduction, he had almost fallen into the seven-tailed Arctic fox's trap. Yuhauran was stunned when he saw Qin 13 obediently listen to his suggestion and kill the seven-tailed Arctic fox without hesitation. Yuhauran, although Qin 13 isn't affected by the pink smoke, it doesn't mean he isn't affected. Fortunately, the pagoda spirit in his sea of consciousness explained in time. At this moment, he's both affected by his own instincts and the seven-tailed Arctic fox. If you don't believe me, you can ask him directly if he's interested in the immortality peach. Yuhauran was very tempted by Thaling's suggestion, but when he saw Qin 13 take out a small and exquisite bell from his sleeve and contact Qin Yi, he suppressed the urge to ask for the time being. After receiving Qin Yi's instructions through the bell, Qin 13 cupped his fists and took his leave. Holy son-in-law, since the culprit who abducted Great General Gu Yu has been killed, this subordinate must return to Xianying City immediately. 13. Do you know what this is? Yuhauran asked nervously as he pointed at the bowl-sized immortality peach in front of him. This subordinate doesn't know and doesn't want to know. Qin 13 immediately replied without looking closely at the peach hanging on the branch. In that case, you should return to Xianying City as soon as possible. Qin 13's response confirmed Thaling's explanation. Yuhauran inwardly sighed in relief and motioned for Qin 13 to leave. A peach tree could bear 12 peaches of immortality. Even if he was given 1 or 2 peaches of immortality, Yuhauran would not have any objections. However, according to Thaling, the peach tree at the end of the cave was very likely to be related to the demon monarch of the monkey clan in the near ancient times, as well as the expert who could revive the peach tree. Even though the demon emperor of the monkey race and that powerful being had long turned into ashes, they had left behind some means that could still affect the current state of things. It was just like the monkey emperor's life-bound emperor artifact, as I wish. Therefore, the fewer people who knew about this kind of secret, the better. Given Qin 13's special identity, there was no way he could keep the immortality peach tree a secret. Left with no other choice, Yuhauran used the seven-tailed fox's secret art to send Qin 13 out of the waterfall cave. Thaling had also used a special art to make Qin 13 forget all about the immortality peach tree. Since the seven-tailed fox's soul had been destroyed, it could be considered a dead object that could be stored in a storage space. Therefore, Qin 13 put the fox's corpse into his storage ring, then turned and left the cave and the waterfall. After Qin 13 left, Yuhauran walked to the foot of the immortality peach tree. Looking at one of the dangling peaches, Yuhauran was overjoyed. He stood on tiptoe, intending to pluck one for a taste. However, as soon as his fingers touched the peach, a numbing sensation that numbed even his soul caused him to stumble back several meters. Thaling, why didn't you warn me beforehand? Yuhauran grumbled in exasperation as he circulated his soul force and elemental energy to eliminate the numbing sensation. This is to teach you a lesson. You need to think twice before you do anything. In the face of Yuhauran's exasperated complaints, the tower spirit first warned him before solemnly reminding him. "You Howren, the seven-tailed fox entered this space half an hour before we did. Why hasn't it plucked any immortality peaches in such a long time? Haven't you thought about it carefully?" "Thaling, I'm sorry. I'll be more careful in the future." After hearing the Tower Genie's reminder, Howren knew that he had made a mistake and quickly apologized to the Tower Genie. Howren, as a pill master with profound cultivation, you should know that the more precious a spirit herb is, the more likely it is for a spirit beast to appear to protect it. As an immortal tree that can directly raise one's cultivation, how can an immortal peach tree not have some means to protect itself? "Thaling, what's the origin of the energy that made my soul feel numb?" Howren hurriedly asked. "That's a layer of defensive energy formed when the immortality peach tree absorbed the power of lightning in the world as it grew. It's equivalent to a guardian spirit beast protecting it." "What about its power?" There were strong and weak lightning powers. Howren needed to determine the strength of the lightning to decide whether he should pluck the immortality peaches himself or let Thaling do it. Howren, even the rank 4 seven-tailed fox couldn't pluck the immortality peaches. "What do you think about its power?" Thaling couldn't help but sneer when he saw that Howren still hadn't discovered anything special about the immortality peach tree through the various actions of the seven-tailed fox. After hearing Thaling's sneer, Howren knew that his state of mind had been completely messed up by the immortality peaches. Therefore, he took a deep breath and tried his best to calm down. Then, he signaled to Thaling. "Thaling, do it." Thaling nodded satisfactorily when he saw that Howren had finally realized his problem. Then, he left Howren's mind and appeared in front of the immortality peach tree. Thaling quickly made a seal with his 10 fingers and used the circular seal to trap the immortality peaches. Then, one by one, the immortality peaches were sucked into the victor by Thaling. Howren, the power of lightning on the immortality peaches will dissipate in about 3 days. At that time, use 2 or 3 immortality peaches and see if you can raise your cultivation and physical body to the complete 10th grade Martial King realm. In this way, it'll be easier for you to enter the mystery realm and take risks, Thaling suggested after sucking the 12 immortality peaches into the victor. "Okay, I'll listen to you." Howren nodded and agreed with Thaling's suggestion. Then, he looked at the withering immortality peach tree. "Howren, don't worry. After 100 years, the immortality peach tree will grow new shoots and then start a new cycle of growth, blooming, bearing fruit, and withering." Seeing that Howren was looking at the withering immortality peach tree, Thaling thought that Howren was worried about the immortality peach tree and quickly comforted him. Chapter 865. In the space at the end of the cave, through the boundless knowledge sea, Thaling discovered that in Howren's eyes, a sprout of the peach of immortality appeared. Thaling was ecstatic. Then, he immediately summoned Howren's second doppelganger in the victor and asked him to go to the entrance at the end of the cave and set up a defensive and confusing formation to prevent anyone from accidentally breaking in. After the second doppelganger left, Thaling immediately used his divine thought to gather the spiritual chi in the entire space so that Howren could use it at any time. As the peach of immortality in Howren's eyes began to grow 2 leaves, a suction force gradually formed from his body. At first, the suction force was very weak, and it did not increase his strength at all. However, as the leaves from the peach of immortality in his eyes grew bigger and bigger, and as the number of leaves increased, the strength of the suction force began to increase. As the suction force absorbed more and more gaseous spiritual chi, his cultivation and physical body, which had long been consolidated, began to slowly improve. When the peach of immortality in his eyes grew into a small sapling, Howren's body emitted 2 auras of a breakthrough. As the auras rose, his cultivation broke through to the middle stage of the 3rd grade Martial King, and his physical body advanced to the middle stage of the 6th grade Martial King. As the sapling of the peach of immortality continued to grow, the strength of the suction force became stronger and stronger. His cultivation and physical body advanced continuously, and soon, he reached the peak of the 3rd grade and the 6th grade. When the sapling of the peach of immortality in Yu Haoran's eyes grew into a mature spiritual tree, the strength of the suction force increased by more than 10 times. His cultivation successfully broke through to the early stage of the 4th grade Martial King, and his physical body advanced to the early stage of the 7th grade Martial King. Alas! The image of the immortality peach tree appeared in Yu Haoran's mind. From the beginning, it had sprouted, to the end, it had grown into a mature spirit tree. And yet, it had only helped Yu Haoran's cultivation base and fleshly body to break through by one minor level. If Yu Haoran's cultivation had been at the martial royal realm, he could have entered the state of enlightenment in advance, and with the help of the peach of immortality, he could have broken through to the martial sage realm. But now it's a pity. Yu Haoran, who had entered the state of enlightenment in advance, did not hear Thaling's sigh and muttering just now. At this moment, he was attracted by the peach of immortality's consciousness, which caused his cultivation and physical body advanced rapidly. His divine soul continued to grow and strengthen. The rapid growth and strengthening of the divine soul was even more effective in enhancing the effects of epiphany. It wasn't long before the first bud of the immortality peach tree appeared in his eyes. When the peach of immortality bore its first bud, the suction force on his body suddenly increased by more than 10 times. The suction force instantly increased by dozens of times. Together with the dense gaseous spiritual energy in the air, Xiao Chen's cultivation and physical body, which had just broken through, skyrocketed. By the time his cultivation had reached the peak of the 4th grade of the Earth Martial King and his physical body had reached the peak of the 7th grade, the large amount of gaseous spiritual qi that the Tower Spirit had used its divine sense to draw in could no longer satisfy the needs of his cultivation and physical body to break through to a higher realm. Faced with this situation, the Tower Spirit did not hesitate in the slightest. It directly took out a large amount of 5th rank, 1st to 9th rank spirit stones from the Territory Tower. Then, it used its divine sense to shatter the spirit stones and assist Yu Haoran's cultivation in breaking through to the early 5th rank Martial King. At the same time, he mobilized a large amount of pure astral power stored in the Victor and used it to help Yu Haoran's physical body advance to the 8th grade Martial King. However, as the peach of immortality in Yu Haoran's eyes began to bear buds, his cultivation and physical body advanced rapidly. As a result, Thaling could only shatter the spiritual stones and mobilize the pure astral power in the Victor. Boom! 10 minutes. In just 10 minutes, the peach of immortality in Yu Haoran's eyes bore its 12th bud, and all 12 buds bloomed at the same time. His cultivation, which had just reached the early stage of the 5th grade Martial King, broke through to the early stage of the 6th grade Martial King, and quickly reached the peak of the 6th grade Martial King. When his physical body advanced to the early stage of the 9th grade Martial King, it quickly reached the peak of the 9th grade Martial King. Fortunately, his physical body had reached the peak of the 9th grade Martial King. It would be difficult for him to break through in a short time. Therefore, Thaling turned off the Victor for the time being and stopped the input of astral power. He focused on improving his cultivation. In the following period of time, as the blooming buds formed small peaches of immortality, the peaches of immortality grew little by little. When they grew into ripe peaches of immortality the size of bowls, Yu Haoran's cultivation finally stopped at the peak of the 8th grade Martial King. At this moment, Thaling, who no longer needed to use the spiritual stones to provide spiritual qi, looked at Yu Haoran nervously. He saw the peach of immortality and the 12 peaches of immortality in his eyes. Since no one was picking them, the 12 ripe peaches of immortality began to fall off the branches one by one. They quickly fell to the ground and instantly turned into a large amount of pure spiritual qi and disappeared from sight. When the 12 ripe peaches of immortality had all fallen off the branches, Thaling, who was nervous, could not help but clench his fists and murmur softly, continue to have an epiphany. Continue to comprehend the withering and rebirth of the peach of immortality. Complete the reincarnation between life and death. Unfortunately, when the leaves of the peach of immortality had just started to turn yellow, Yuhaoran slowly closed his eyes. Thaling shook his head and sighed in disappointment. Thaling, don't be disappointed. Actually, with my own accumulation, being able to comprehend the law of life at the martial king realm is already a heaven-defying opportunity. Closing his eyes meant the end of the epiphany. Yuhaoran, whose consciousness had left the state of emptiness, happened to hear Thaling's sigh just now. He did not need to think too much to know why Thaling had sighed. Therefore, he comforted Thaling as he used the rich spiritual qi in the space to consolidate his cultivation and physical body grade that he had just broken through. If I deliberately pursue the law of death, which overlaps with the law of life, it will destroy my state of mind and affect my comprehension of the law of life. Yuhaoran, I understand what you said just now. I'm just a little unwilling to accept it, Thaling said regretfully in the face of Yuhaoran's comforting words. After all, the combined might of the law of life and the law of death will not only rank in the top 10 among the tens of thousands of laws, but the combined power of the laws can also form a domain that separates life and death. It's definitely the strongest method to challenge those of a higher level. Thaling, if it weren't for the epiphany, I would only be a third-grade martial king now. Yuhaoran remained calm in the face of Thaling's unwilling explanation and continued to comfort him contentedly. As a third-grade martial king, being able to comprehend the power of the laws that only martial sages can comprehend is already extremely heaven-defying. I'm already very satisfied that I was able to succeed in the end. Furthermore, my current cultivation is still low and I still have a long way to go. I have enough confidence that I will definitely be able to comprehend the law of death in the future and then overlap it with the law of life to form the true law of life and death. At this point, Yuhaoran's consciousness merged with his soul and he bowed deeply to Thaling. Thaling, thank you. Chapter 866. In the space at the end of the cave. Thaling, if you hadn't been willing to consume the power of your soul to perform the possession technique, allowing me to sense the endless vitality contained in the law of time in advance, I wouldn't have been able to take advantage of the withering of the peach tree to enter a state of epiphany. Even if I was lucky enough to enter a state of epiphany, without the understanding and accumulation of the endless vitality, it would be absolutely impossible for me to comprehend the law of life. At this point, Yuhaoran bowed again and continued to express his gratitude in a very sincere tone. Thaling, thank you. Thaling waved his hand and motioned for Yuhaoran to stop being so polite. He then looked directly at his soul and asked in a tone full of anticipation. Yuhaoran, just now you said that you were confident that you would comprehend the law of death in the future. Did you also feel the aura of death and withering when you used the law of time in the law of time? That's right. Nodding, Yuhaoran recalled with some lingering fear. Thaling, compared to the feeling of endless vitality that can fill all things with vitality, the aura of death and withering is too terrifying. I think that before my cultivation reaches the peak of the 9th level of the martial emperor realm, before my soul has advanced to the advanced level, before I have the confidence and courage to overcome the threat of the aura of death and withering, I will definitely not easily comprehend the law of death. Thaling could clearly feel the fear that came from the bottom of Yuhaoran's heart in his tone. The words that were already at the tip of his tongue were forcibly swallowed back down by Thaling. Without experiencing the extreme fear of facing death, how could one comprehend the true essence of the law of death? But as Yuhaoran had just explained, before everything was ready, It was definitely a risky move to try the threat of death and withering on one's life. The slightest carelessness could create a psychological shadow of absolute fear in his heart and cause him to miss the opportunity to comprehend the law of death. Thinking of this, Thowling not only swept away his disappointment, but also felt deeply gratified by Yuhauran's restraint in the face of the law of time's temptation. Yuhauran, the breakthrough in your cultivation and the advancement of your physical body's grade has allowed you to advance a total of 48 small realms. The tower spirit immediately shifted its attention to the cultivation realm that Zhang Xian had just broken through, so it quickly reminded Zhang Xian. Although breaking through using the state of enlightenment won't harm your own potential, it will inevitably cause the foundation to fluctuate. Therefore, you should use the rich spirit qi in this space to consolidate your cultivation as soon as possible. And, nodding his head, Yuhauran's consciousness returned to his physical body. Then, he closed his eyes and began to consolidate his realm after his breakthrough. Xianyang, the Imperial Palace Lord, Qin Qin's Qin 13 Qinashin, he waved his hand, indicating for Qin 13 to withdraw for the time being, and carefully guessed. Qin Yi, you are this emperor's most trusted confidant and also this emperor's right-hand man, so if there's anything you want to say, just say it. There's no need to beat around the bush. Hearing the caution in Qin Yi's suspicious tone, Emperor Qin knew what his concerns were. Although he had his own suspicions, he still wanted to hear Qin Yi's opinion and see if it was the same as his. Lord, this subordinate suspects that the prince consort tampered with 13th's memory. After receiving Emperor Qin's heartfelt promise, Qin Yi finally voiced his inner conjecture. Reason. Seeing that Qin Yi's guess was the same as his, Emperor Qin immediately asked. This subordinate suspects that the seven-tailed Arctic fox might know about the secret between the Four Symbols sect and the Green Hill Fox clan. Moreover, this secret is very likely to involve the prince consort himself. Therefore, the prince consort tampered with 13th's memory and had him kill the seven-tailed Arctic fox directly to prevent the secret from being leaked. At this point, Qin Yi suddenly frowned. Qin Yi, just say what you think. Emperor Qin nodded in agreement with Qin Yi's conjecture just now, but he was very dissatisfied with Qin Yi's frown and silent action. Your Majesty, the 18 people of the Dark Dragon team were personally groomed by you, so you must know their situation very well. Not only does 13 have outstanding potential, but his state of mind is also tenacious, and his comprehension of the law of edge is about to reach perfection. Even if I did it personally, I wouldn't be able to tamper with his memory. Then, how did the prince consort tamper with a small part of his memory when he was awake? After hearing the reason for Qin Yi's frown, Emperor Qin smiled and asked. Qin Yi, if it was anyone else, they definitely wouldn't be able to do it, but for the prince consort, there seems to be nothing in this world that he can't do. At this point, Emperor Qin couldn't help but laugh bitterly. This emperor suspects that under certain circumstances, he can tamper with my memory. Also, this emperor believes that, if he is forced into a corner, he can defeat or even kill this emperor. Your Majesty, isn't this too exaggerated? Hearing Emperor Qin's praise for the prince consort, Qin Yi's eyes widened, an incredulous look on his face. Qin Yi, no matter what the prince consort's intention is, don't continue to ask about it, and don't let Qin Yi know about it, understand? Emperor Qin didn't hesitate to lower his own reputation to raise Yuhauran's deterrence. He wanted the proud and arrogant Qin Yi to have some misgivings, so that he wouldn't secretly investigate Yuhauran because of doubts in his heart. If he angered Yuhauran because of this and caused a rift between them, the gains wouldn't make up for the losses. After all, after surviving the third layer of calamity, he needed to consider how to smoothly advance to the martial sovereign realm. This required him to gather more national providence, as well as let his physical body, divine soul, and state of mind withstand the power of law. All of this required Yuhauran's full support. This subordinate understands. After nodding to indicate that he understood, Qin bowed and left the study. Getting up and leaving the dragon throne, Emperor Qin walked to the window sill of the study and looked to the north, muttering to himself, "Howren, what kind of secret does the seven-tailed white fox know that you didn't hesitate to tamper with Qin XIII's memory in order to hide it from this emperor?" His cultivation broke through from the early 3rd grade Martial King to the peak of the 8th grade Martial King, and his physical body rose from the early 6th grade Martial King to the peak of the 9th grade Martial King. Since his rebirth, this was Yu Haoren's most consecutive breakthroughs. Although the more breakthroughs, the stronger the increase in strength, the longer it took to consolidate the realm. It took him nearly 3 days and 3 nights before he finally managed to consolidate his cultivation base and physical body after his successive breakthroughs. The consolidation of the realm was only to allow the power after the breakthrough to adapt to his sea of consciousness and Dantian. His sea of consciousness and Dantian hadn't really adapted to the power after the breakthrough. Chapter 867. Looking at the rock communicator beast lying in a pool of blood, Yu Haoren let out a long sigh of relief. Yu Haoren, after these few days of continuous fighting with exotic beasts, you can now be considered to have grasped the strength of your breakthrough. Looking at Yu Haoren adjusting the churning blood in his body through breathing, Thaling reminded him like a dutiful master. But the path of cultivation is about balancing tension and relaxation. What you need to do next is not to continue fighting with exotic beasts, but to completely relax and let your tense mind and body relax completely. The reason for doing this is not only to better adapt to the strength of your breakthrough, but also to improve your mental state cultivation. Thaling, I understand, thank you. Yu Haoren nodded and thanked him as he put away the purple rod in his hand and tried his best to disperse the murderous aura he had accumulated during the fight. Yu Haoren, there's a beautiful lake about 300 miles ahead. Why don't you get a small boat and cruise the lake while enjoying the scenery? Thaling suggested with a smile. Good idea. After nodding and praising him, Yu Haoren directly shot up into the sky. However, he didn't immediately rush to the lake in front of him. Instead, he turned his head and looked behind him with a hint of worry in his eyes. I'm thinking of that black bear. Seeing the worry in Yu Haoren's eyes, Thaling thought for a moment and knew what he was worried about. Back in Weishan City, the black bear took the risk to use the ancient ancestral martial technique in its bloodline, causing its soul power, demonic power, and bloodline to be instantly depleted. It had no choice but to sleep to recover. Later on, after awakening with the help of a large number of top-notch pills, it obtained the opportunity to break through both its grade and bloodline. In order not to affect Yu Haoren's takeover of the Northern Army and not delay him from breaking the Four Symbols concentration formation, the black bear chose to leave alone and look for a suitable place to break through. It had been almost half a month since they parted ways. Under normal circumstances, it should have broken through long ago, but it hadn't appeared until now. It was no wonder that Yu Haoren was so worried. Seeing that Thaling had guessed his thoughts, Yu Haoren nodded without concealing anything. When we separated, He Xiong said that he would need at most 10 days to achieve a breakthrough in grade and bloodline. But now, although Yu Haoren didn't continue, Thaling knew what he wanted to say next, so he smiled and comforted him. Yu Haoren, don't worry. After awakening the battle consciousness of the ancient divine beast bloodline, the black bear's overall strength has increased far beyond your imagination. Even if it isn't a match for a 9th grade martial saint, I'm afraid it won't be able to escape. According to my speculation, the black bear should be greedy for a breakthrough in grade, and wants to use the ancestor's battle consciousness to improve its bloodline to try to break through to a higher grade. I hope so. Taking a deep breath, Yu Haoren shook his head and sighed. Then he turned around and went straight to the lake that Thaling had mentioned. Less than half an hour after Yu Haoren left, a black shadow like lightning appeared in front of the rapid boulder beast that he had just killed. However, the way that the black shadow landed was very awkward, and it was obvious that it had been severely injured. Looking at the rapid boulder beast lying in a pool of blood, the Black Shadow carefully sniffed the remaining smell in the air, and said to himself anxiously, "Oh no, Master left half an hour ago. I don't know if I can find Master in the shortest time possible." After muttering to himself, the Black Shadow looked up at the direction that it had just passed, and a trace of panic immediately appeared in his huge eyes. "Fight!" Forcibly suppressing the panic in his eyes, the Black Shadow gnashed his teeth and said to himself. Then, a black gas instantly shrouded the Black Shadow. Then, it disappeared from the scene at a speed more than 10 times faster than lightning. Less than 30 seconds after the Black Shadow disappeared, 7 experts wearing the same clothes and emitting a powerful aura appeared where the Black Shadow had just been, which was in front of the rapid boulder beast's corpse. That black bear just used a secret technique to leave, quickly chase after it. One of the middle-aged men, who was about 40 years old, had a dignified appearance, and was a mid-9th level martial saint. Through the remaining aura at the scene, he quickly determined the method and time that the Black Shadow had used to leave. Calling out to the 6 people beside him, the middle-aged man took the lead and flew into the air, going straight in the direction that the Black Shadow had escaped. The scenery was beautiful, the lake water was clear, and there were no powerful beasts around. The lake that Thowling had just pointed out had become a tourist destination. Looking at the men and women in front of him, who were either renting boats to swim on the lake, or lying on the grass by the lake, or running into the dense forest not far away, Yuhauran couldn't help but bitterly smile and complain. "Thowling, this is the place that you recommended to relax." "Ha ha!" Facing Yuhauran's complaint, Thowling felt embarrassed and laughed dryly. After all, when he used his divine sense to check the surroundings, he only felt that the environment here was good, and there was no one that could threaten Yuhauran, so he took the initiative to recommend this place. Who would have thought that this place was actually a holy place for romance or even a secret meeting place for that kind of thing? "Forget it, since I'm here, I'll just take it as it comes." As the artifact spirit of Victor, Thowling was more concerned about safety, and basically didn't pay too much attention to human feelings. Therefore, after Yuhauran complained, he chose to stay and relax. After all, putting aside those young men and women who were dating, the environment of this lake was indeed good, and it was very suitable for relaxing. He used a first-grade 10th-level spirit stone to rent a 2-person boat. As Yuhauran used his Yuan Qi to drive the boat, he secretly cursed the immorality of the merchant in his heart. If a first-grade 10th-level spirit stone was exchanged for silver, it would be worth about 50,000 taels of silver. If he rented a boat normally, it would be worth less than 1 silver tael at most. Although he wasn't lacking in spirit stones now, he was still rather dissatisfied with the merchant's forceful methods. Using his Yuan Qi to drive the boat to the center of the lake, Yuhauran allowed the boat to stop on the surface of the lake. He leaned against the boat and took out the 25 kilograms of 100-blossom powder he found in the Star Tomb. He savored the fine wine while completely relaxing and admiring the scenery. The 100-blossom powder, brewed by a professional winemaker in ancient times, not only did it contain a special energy that could raise one's strength, the fragrance of the wine was mellow and fragrant. Chapter 868. In the lake. It smells so good. The mellow and fragrant smell of wine quickly attracted the attention of a beautiful woman with a hot body. That's right, it seems to be the 100 flowers fragrance specially made by the heavenly earth. But the wine smell is mellow and fragrant. It should be the best of the 100 flowers fragrance. I have never tasted it before. A young man in embroidered clothes sat opposite the beautiful woman. He inhaled the wine fragrance in the air and pointed out the source of the fragrance with experience. "Brother Hua, do you want me to taste it?" The beautiful woman looked at the young man in embroidered clothes expectantly and said coquettishly. Her coquettish voice made the young man in embroidered clothes feel a fire of lust in his lower abdomen. He quickly nodded and agreed. Yuding, wait here. I will go and buy some from that person. Then the young man in embroidered clothes rose into the air and flew directly to Yuharen's boat. If you dare to step onto my boat, I'll break your legs. Yuharen didn't even turn his head as he threatened the young man in embroidered robes. My friend, I come from the Huang family in Guangling City. I am the third son of the family leader. Yuharen's cold threat made the young man in embroidered clothes stop immediately. But when he thought of his noble background and the 3 martial emperor guards by the lake, he immediately threatened arrogantly. Get lost. Originally, he was tasting the wine and looking at the scenery. He had gradually relaxed his mind and body, which had been in a tense state, gradually relaxed. But the young man in embroidered clothes' interruption and threat immediately aroused the violence in his heart. He could not help but turn his head and scold him with a murderous look. This was the after-effect of a rapid increase in cultivation level. It was also the important reason why Thaling suggested that he come to relax. You dare to insult me? He asked him to get lost. After hearing Yuharen's scolding, the young man in embroidered clothes, who had never been humiliated like this, pointed at Yuharen with a red face and roared. I will count to 3. If you don't leave, don't blame me for feeding you to the fish in the lake. Yuharen continued to threaten the young man in embroidered clothes coldly. Men! Yuharen's second threat completely infuriated the brocade-clothed youth. He hurriedly shouted at the lakeside. Then, 3 martial royal realm experts appeared beside the young man like a gust of wind. Third young master, what's wrong? A silver-haired old man, who was about 60 years old and had reached the peak of the 7th grade martial royal realm, asked the young man in brocade clothes as he looked at Yuharen sharply. Uncle Cho, capture him for me. I want him to know the consequences of offending me. I want him to know what it means to live a life worse than death. Pointing at Yuharen, who was lying on the small boat, the young man in embroidered clothes roared at the top of his lungs. Yuharen, I've realized that you're really a jinx. No matter where you go, there's no peace. Just lying on a boat, drinking a little wine, and enjoying the beautiful scenery by the lake, under such circumstances, could lead to a fatal disaster. Thaling was also quite depressed and speechless about this. Bah! Hearing the nickname Thaling gave him, Yuharen immediately retorted in a bad mood. Thaling, you're the jinx. In my previous life, although I, Yuharen, often caused trouble, I've never been so easily troubled by others like in this life. The reason must be you. It must be the bad luck on your body that spread to me, causing me to often suffer from undeserved disasters. Alright, don't complain to me. It's better to hurry up and activate the blood essence of the large power King Kong Ape in your acupoints and get rid of these troublemakers in front of you. The tower spirit could not help but roll its eyes at Yuharen's slander. Originally, it wanted to argue with Yuharen to see who was the real jinx. However, when it saw the silver-haired old man at the peak of the 7th grade martial emperor slowly walking toward it, it quickly reminded Yuharen. Old man, if you immediately turn around and leave with that brat, I might be merciful this time and not pursue the matter of disturbing my wine tasting. Standing up, he put away the 100 flowers fragrance wine and looked at the old man who was slowly walking towards him. Yuharen said with a cold smile. What if I don't leave? The old man asked with a sneer. Then you'll be like that brat and become food for the fish in the lake. Taking out the purple rod, Yuharen threatened with killing intent. Ha! After hearing Yuharen's threat, the silver-haired old man seemed to have heard the biggest joke in the world, and could not help but laugh out loud. When the laughter ended, the silver-haired old man immediately mobilized his soul force and origin energy, condensing a huge palm, and then fiercely grabbed at Yuharen. Activating the blood essence of the large power King Kong Ape in his acupoints, Yuharen wanted to transform and break the giant palm, and then kill the silver-haired old man and the youth in embroidered clothes. However, he unexpectedly discovered a black shadow, rushing over with a speed more than 10 times faster than lightning. Bam! The rapidly approaching black shadow directly shattered the giant palm that the old man had condensed using soul force and origin energy, and then fiercely smashed towards the small boat that Yuhauran was on. Black Bear. Looking at the black shadow that was quickly smashing towards him, the familiar aura allowed Yuhauran to quickly know the origin of the black shadow. However, he was unable to control his charging speed, so he knew that Black Bear was definitely in trouble. He quickly transformed and caught the black bear that was smashing towards him in time. Then, he steadily landed on the small boat. Black Bear, what's wrong? Looking at Black Bear, whose entire body was covered in blood and whose aura had fallen to the 6th step of the King Realm, Yuhauran asked with a face as cold as frost. Master, there are 7 experts from the Yuan sect who want to extract the ancestral blood essence in my bloodline. After seeing Yuhauran, He Xiong's tense mind suddenly relaxed. Before he fainted, He Xiong quickly explained the situation. It turned out that after they parted, Black Bear had successfully found a cave with abundant spiritual energy that was suitable for him to break through his grade and bloodline. With the help of the top-notch medicinal pills that Yuhauran had given him before he left, and with the help of the ancestral battle consciousness in his bloodline, not only did he break through his grade and successfully reach the peak of the 4th step of the Sage Realm, but he also succeeded in increasing the purity of his ancestral bloodline to 15%. However, just as Thaling had guessed, after seeing that his ancestral bloodline had been increased to 15%, Black Bear wanted to use his ancestral bloodline to try and break through to the 6th step of the 4th step of the Sage Realm. Although he finally succeeded in breaking through to the 6th step of the 4th step of the Sage Realm, the aura that was formed when he broke through just happened to alarm the 8 martial saints from the Yuan sect. One of them was an expert who was good at studying the blood essence of strange beasts and used it to increase his cultivation and strength. After discovering the special bloodline in Black Bear's body, he was immediately pleasantly surprised and wanted to extract all of Black Bear's blood essence. Faced with such a situation, how could Black Bear not resist? Unfortunately, even the weakest of the 8 martial saints of the Yuan sect was at the peak of the 7th grade martial saint realm. Chapter 869. Sorry. The 2nd and 3rd chapters of today's update are wrong. I will contact the editor tomorrow morning to correct it. In the lake, looking at the unconscious Black Bear, an uncontrollable strong murderous aura rose to the sky. The murderous aura was so strong that it was almost tangible. Yuhauran's face vaguely appeared. The materialization of the murderous aura required not only a strong murderous aura but also extremely high talent. Looking up at the strong murderous aura that was about to materialize, and then looking at Yuhauran who was standing on the boat, the silver-haired old man, who was about to reform the giant palm and continue to attack, suddenly changed his expression. He immediately gave up the idea of continuing to capture Yuhauran. The silver-haired old man turned around and returned to the side of the young man in embroidered clothes. He did not allow the young man to object and quickly flew to the lake with him. The silver-haired old man even chose to ignore the cries of the beautiful woman. "Uncle Cho, what's wrong with you?" The young man in embroidered clothes who was forcibly brought to the lake asked with a rather dissatisfied expression. "Third young master, that young man is not someone you can provoke." Ignoring the young man's complaints, the silver-haired old man looked at Yuhauran with a dignified expression and warned him with a tone of lingering fear. "If you don't want to bring disaster to the family, just stand here and watch. If that young man is safe in the end, even if you kneel down and kowtow, you still have to ask for his forgiveness. Otherwise, I will personally chop off our heads in order to resolve the young man's resentment towards the family." After hearing the silver-haired old man's serious warning, the young man in embroidered clothes looked at Yuhauran with eyes full of doubts. This was because he really could not understand what was so terrifying about this young man who was not even older than him. Uncle Cho, whose cultivation was at the peak of the 7th grade martial emperor, was so afraid of him. He even did not hesitate to commit suicide to ask for the young man's forgiveness. Ignoring the silver-haired old man who left with the young man in embroidered clothes, Yuhaoran raised his head and looked in the direction where the black bear had escaped. The murderous aura that constantly surged in his heart made his eyes gradually redden. Yuhaoran used the possession technique. The pagoda spirit reminded Yuhaoran with a murderous look. Ever since He Xiong chose to follow Yuhaoran, he could be said to be hard-working and diligent. He was even more loyal and devoted to Yuhaoran, risking his life several times to protect his master. Just like Yuhaoran, in Thaling's heart, the black bear was no longer just a pet beast. It was more like a partner, a friend, and a brother that could live and die with him. Now, not only did someone heavily injure the black bear, they even wanted to extract the ancestral blood essence within its body. Wasn't this equivalent to directly taking its life? Therefore, Thaling could not wait to kill the martial saints of the Yuan sect who were about to arrive. Okay. Yuhaoran nodded in agreement with Thaling's proposal. After all, the black bear had mentioned before it fainted that other than the peak 7th grade martial saint that it had killed with its death roar, there were 4 8th grade martial saints and 3 9th grade martial saints among the remaining 7 experts. Moreover, the person with the highest cultivation had reached the peak of the 9th grade martial saint realm. Therefore, in order to successfully kill the other party, he could only temporarily use the possession technique and then use the power of the law of time scars. Moreover, he also wanted to know the real purpose of the Yuan sect, one of the top sects, to send 8 high-level martial saints to the southern region. After all, the Yuan sect was not in the southern region but in the central region. Just as the pagoda spirit used the possession technique, 7 powerhouses with terrifying auras appeared in the air above the lake like lightning. The 7 terrifying auras combined together not only directly shattered the clouds above the void, but also broke the countless boats on the lake. As the entire lake was shrouded by the terrifying auras, the men and women on the boats could not fly in the air in the face of the broken boat. They could only fall into the lake and slowly swim to the lakeside by means of rowing. The young beauties who were soaked in the lake successfully swam to the lakeside and successfully came ashore. Their wet clothes added to their endless charm. Unfortunately, no one at the scene noticed the increase in their charm, because everyone's eyes were all fixed on the 7 martial saints floating in the air. Boy, hand over the black bear on your boat. The terrifying aura successfully locked down the entire lake. After confirming that the unconscious black bear could not continue to escape, one of the 7 martial sages from the Yuan sect, whose cultivation had reached the middle 9th level of the martial sage realm, ordered in an unusually domineering manner. "It was you who hurt my black bear." Yuhaoran looked coldly at the other party and questioned in a tone without a trace of emotion. It was as if the other party was dead in his eyes. "Your black bear." After hearing Yuhaoran's question, the middle 9th grade martial saint was first stunned. Then, he could not help but refute with a sneer. "What a joke! This black bear has never signed any contract. How can it be your beast pet? Who said that I have to sign a contract to determine whether it is my beast pet?" While questioning the other party with a sneer, Yuhaoran rose into the air and slowly flew towards the other party. "Boy, who are you?" Yuhaoran's overly calm reaction made the expert with the highest cultivation among the 7 frown. He tried his best to maintain a calm tone and asked, "Yuhaoran of the Southern Domain's second-rate sect, the 100 Qi Gate." Yuhaoran looked at the expert who had just questioned him and replied coldly, "In that case, why don't you obediently hand over the black bear? He was just a disciple of a second-rate sect. Any one of them could destroy the 100 Qi Gate." Therefore, the martial saint who had ordered him to hand over the black bear immediately ordered with a firm tone. As for the peak 9th grade martial saint who had just questioned him, he looked at Yuhaoran with disdain and did not say anything else. "You have been talking from the beginning to the end." The other party's firm order made Yuhaoran's gaze return to the other party. The sneer on his face returned to normal. Yuhaoran said calmly. Furthermore, you were able to discover that I have never signed any contract with the Black Bear. This means that you know a lot about strange beasts. Then, you are the one who wants to extract the divine beast blood essence from the Black Bear's bloodline. That's right. That's me. The other party admitted with a sneer. Then congratulations to you for being able to survive until the end. Slowly raising his arm, Yuhaoran appeared in front of the other party and said with a smile, "Scars of time." Then, he pointed his finger at an upper 8th grade martial saint expert. A wave of energy that seemed to have passed through the barrier of time and space shot directly at the upper 8th grade martial saint expert. Chapter 870. 8888 Go 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 Go. In the lake. Using the power of the law of time, Yuhaoran analyzed the opponent's life experience. He immediately checked the opponent's real purpose of entering the southern mountain range. But he found nothing, because the opponent had been following the strongest expert and did not know the real purpose of entering the southern mountain range. He looked at the peak 9th level martial saint who had asked him about his origin, but after knowing that he was only from the second-rate sect, the 100 Chi Gate, he looked at him with disdain. Seeing Yuhaoran's gaze directed towards him, the peak 9th grade martial saint was instantly shocked. He instinctively wanted to turn around and flee. After all, the law of time that Yuhaoran had just used was too terrifying. But he had forgotten. In order to prevent the Black Bear from escaping, the aura of the 7 people was united. Although this could increase the power of the aura by several times and prevent the Black Bear from using the secret method to escape, it also trapped them in the aura and made it difficult for them to escape. Quickly remove the united aura. Realizing that he was trapped in the united aura, the peak 9th level martial saint hurriedly reminded his companions. Time scars. But at this moment, a cold voice like that of the Grim Reaper sounded. The peak 9th level martial saint found that his body and divine soul were instantly split into countless pieces by a strange force. How is this possible? Yuhaoran shouted in disbelief when he saw the sect master of the Yuan sect giving the peak 9th level martial saint the task. That's impossible. The pagoda spirit in the sea of consciousness was equally shocked. Then, Thaling, who was the first to wake up from the shock, reminded Yuhaoran. Yuhaoran, immediately kill all the people of the Yuan sect and make sure that the secret will not be leaked. Okay. After being reminded by Thaling, Yuhaoran, who had barely recovered from the shock, immediately pointed at the remaining 5 martial saints of the Yuan sect. Time scars. Time scars. Whether it was Yuhaoran or Thaling, using the power of the law of time 5 times in a row was a huge consumption. If it weren't for the fact that Yuhaoran had comprehended the law of life in advance and was able to greatly reduce the consumption of his spiritual energy when using the law of time scars, he would have died a long time ago. Otherwise, Thaling, who had consumed too much of his spiritual energy, would have ended the possession immediately. Through analyzing the life experiences of the 5 martial saints, Yuhaoran discovered that the martial saint expert who was extremely familiar and knowledgeable about exotic beasts also knew the true purpose of entering the southern region. Thaling, what should we do next? Yuhaoran asked, unable to suppress the excitement in his heart, after taking the 7 martial saint expert's storage artifacts. Yuhaoran, don't ask, don't interfere. After thinking for a while, Thaling gave a suggestion that Yuhaoran could not accept. Why? Yuhaoran asked, puzzled. Because we are neither qualified nor capable to compete for this divine beast cub. Thaling said with a wry smile. Thaling, if we are not qualified and capable to compete for it, then why did you ask me to kill everyone in Yuan sect just now? Yuhaoran continued to ask, puzzled. Because I was distracted at that time. I only wanted to help you obtain the divine beast cub, but I forgot that this divine beast cub has a bloodline connection with a certain terrifying family. The Tower Genie explained with a wry smile. Family of inheritance. After hearing Thaling's reminder with a wry smile, Yu Haoran's expression instantly became dignified. That's right. Thaling motioned Yu Haoran to return to the lake and find a way to settle the black bear that had returned to its original form. The Lu family is one of the oldest families in Tianxian continent. Even I, and even the previous weapon spirit, do not know when it truly originated. Lu Wu, one of the divine beasts in ancient times, second only to the 9 great kings. It has the bloodline of the white tiger and the dragon god. Lu Wu not only has the unparalleled attack power of the white tiger, but also inherited the lustful nature of the dragon god. Yu Haoran, you can guess the relationship between the two. Could it be that the people of the Lu family have the bloodline of the divine beast Lu Wu in their bodies? Yu Haoran took a deep breath and guessed in disbelief. In his previous life, although he had come into contact with some families of inheritance, most of them were families that had the bloodline of the Emperor Wu. The highest level belonged to the guardian families. However, the origin of the guardian families was too mysterious and they had their own principles, so he had only come into contact with some peripheral personnel. Yu Haoran, actually, the families of inheritance in Tianxian continent are divided into 3 levels. Thinking about how Yu Haoran had already successfully comprehended the law of life when he was in the martial king realm. Although he was restricted by the influence of his own soul and was temporarily unable to use the law of life, the sturdiest foundation had already been established and he already had the opportunity to soar into the sky. Therefore, Thaling decided to reveal some secrets of Tianxian continent to him. Thaling, wait a moment. It seemed that Thaling was finally willing to reveal some secrets of Tianxian continent. Yu Haoran felt extremely excited, but after seeing the black bear floating on the lake, he could only think of a way to settle it down. There were many people watching by the lake, so it was not suitable to keep the black bear in the victor. At the same time, as a sacred place for young men and women to talk about love, there were no large boat. Without any other choice, Yu Haoran could only use the blood essence of the strange beast. After transforming into a power King Kong ape, he carried the black bear to the lakeside and laid it flat on the green grass. He also gave it some top-notch healing pills. I, Qiu Rinping, bring my family's disciple, Huang Ziwen, to ask for young hero Yu's forgiveness. Just as Yu Haoran had just given the black bear a healing pill and was planning to sit beside it and listen to Thaling talk about the secrets of the families of inheritance, the silver-haired elder brought the young man in embroidered clothes to his side and sincerely asked for forgiveness. Seeing Yu Haoran turn around, the silver-haired elder immediately scolded the young man in embroidered clothes sternly. Kneel. Young hero Yu, everything is Ziwen's fault. No matter how you punish me, Ziwen will not complain. Hearing Qiu Rinping's stern scolding, Huang Ziwen immediately knelt down and sincerely admitted his sins. Shifting his gaze from Huang Ziwen to the silver-haired elder Qiu Rinping, Yu Haoran said coldly. Originally, according to Yu Haoran's vengeful personality, like Huang Ziwen's provocation just now, I would definitely destroy his soul. Seeing Huang Ziwen's face instantly turn pale, Yu Haoran sighed and said with an indifferent expression. However, just now, the 7 martial saints of Yuan sect have already eliminated the murderous intent in my heart. Therefore, it is thanks to the 7 martial saints of Yuan sect that you are not dead today. Chapter 871. At the lakeside. Let's go. Yu Haoran waved his hand impatiently. Actually, the reason why he let Qiu Rinping and Huang Ziwen off and killed the 7 martial saints of Yuan sect was to eliminate the murderous intent in his heart. The main reason was that Thaling was willing to reveal the secrets of Tianxian continent, which made him feel good at the moment. Young hero Yu, if one day you pass by Guangling City, you must pay a visit to the Huang clan. My Huang clan will definitely take out the utmost sincerity to entertain you. Before turning around and leaving, Qiu Rinping warmly invited. I'll see. Yuhaoran replied indifferently, neither agreeing nor refusing. Yuhaoran, could it be that you plan to make a trip to Guangling City? Yuhaoran's ambiguous reply made Thaling, who was familiar with him, guess. If I have time, maybe I will make a trip to Guangling City. Yuhaoran replied emotionally as he watched Xiu Rinping and Huang Ziwen leave quickly. Thaling did not continue to ask about this. Under normal circumstances, Yuhaoran's emotional expression indicated that there was an enemy in Guangling City that he hated, but also a tender feeling that he could not face. And this tender feeling was very likely related to a certain woman. Thaling, now you can tell me the secrets of the different levels of the inherited families. Yuhaoran put away his emotions and sat down cross-legged, then smiled and said, Yuhaoran, it won't be too late for me to tell you after you've dealt with that woman. Thaling said teasingly. Turning his head to look, Yuhaoran discovered that the beautiful woman who was on the same boat as Huang Ziwen was slowly walking towards him. What's the matter? Yuhaoran asked with a frown. I want to talk to you. Pulling the front of her clothes and sticking out her twin peaks, the beautiful woman exuded endless temptation as she spoke. Scram! Yuhaoran's face darkened as he snapped. In order to hear Thaling talk about the secrets of the inherited families as soon as possible, he was even willing to let go of Huang Ziwen, who had offended him. How could he be in the mood to chat with Thaling? You! She didn't expect Yuhaoran to be so rude and rude. The beautiful woman was so angry that she didn't know what to say. I'll count to 3. Yuhaoran coldly threatened, ignoring the fatal temptation brought by the other party's heavy breathing, which caused the twin peaks on her chest to jump up and down due to her extreme anger. If I count to 3 and you don't disappear from my sight, you will stay here forever. Even a dignified martial saint expert from a first-rate sect had been killed just like that. The beautiful woman knew that the other party's threat was not a joke. If she continued to force herself to stay, she would definitely be killed by the other party. Impotence. However, when she thought of the countless handsome young men who were unable to extricate themselves from her charms, the beautiful woman turned around and left, leaving behind a humiliating sentence that no man could accept. As an expert whose physical body had reached the peak of the 9th grade martial king realm, not only did his body not lose to the strongest exotic beast, but he was also incomparably powerful in that aspect. The word impotence had nothing to do with him at all. Now, he was actually called impotence by a beautiful woman. How could Yuhaoran accept this kind of humiliation? However, he didn't know how to refute it. Was it possible for him to fight 300 rounds with the beautiful woman and let her know how powerful he was? However, if he did that, he would definitely be letting down Qin Lingfei. Looking at the beautiful woman who turned around and left, the extremely depressed Yuhaoran almost spat out blood. Fortunately, as the weapon spirit of Victor, Thaling didn't know much about impotence or impotence, nor was she interested in it. She didn't take the opportunity to make fun of him. Taking a deep breath to relieve the depression in his heart, Yuhaoran tried his best to divert his attention to the secrets of the inherited families that Thaling had already started to talk about. The first-rate inherited families mostly inherited the bloodlines of Emperor Wu and Martial Saint. They can rely on the continuous improvement of their cultivation and strength to gradually awaken the ancestral consciousness in their bloodlines. And these first-rate inherited families have existed for only a few 100,000 to a few million years. Hearing Thaling talk about the first-rate inherited families, Yuhaoran nodded his head and added, Thaling, I've come into contact with many first-rate inherited families in my previous life. I know that not only do they have the inheritance of their ancestral bloodlines, but most of them also have the natal magical artifacts left behind by their ancestors. That's right. Thaling nodded her head to indicate that Yuhaoran's addition was correct, and continued to talk. Yuhaoran, with the speed of your cultivation and strength improvement, and with the assistance I have, you don't have to worry too much about the first-rate inherited families. If they dare to provoke you, you can just kill them. because the true foundation of the first-rate inherited families is nothing more than the natal magical artifacts left behind by their ancestors, the remains of their ancestors, and so on. And these methods can only be used when the family is in danger of being exterminated. So, as long as you don't force them into a corner, or directly kill your way into their family, they can't do anything to you. Although Thaling looked down on the first-rate inherited families, Yuhauran, who had come into contact with them many times, didn't dare to be careless in the slightest. Thaling, in the first-rate inherited families, are there any reclusive martial saints and Emperor Wu? I don't know. In the face of Yuhauran's questioning, Thaling thought for a while, and then gave an uncertain answer. However, according to my understanding of the first-rate inherited families, the longer the inherited families, the more likely there are reclusive martial saints in the family. As for Emperor Wu, with the foundation of the first-rate inherited families, and the limitations of the ancestral bloodline, the probability of an Emperor Wu appearing is so low that it's almost negligible. I see. Thaling's further explanation allowed Yuhauran to understand more about the first-rate inherited families that he came into contact with in his previous life, and also allowed him to completely let go of some of his fears. The second-rate inherited families are a small part of the bloodline of the martial god. Similarly, through the continuous improvement of cultivation and strength, they can gradually awaken the ancestral consciousness in the bloodline. At this point, the tower spirit suddenly exhorted with a solemn expression. Yuhauran, for the second-rate inherited families, try not to provoke the descendants of the second-rate inherited families before your cultivation has reached the limit of the peak of the 9th-grade martial saint, or before you have a weapon of the upper-grade emperor realm or above. Thaling, could there be a reclusive Emperor Wu in the second-rate inherited families? Chapter 872. By the Lake. That's right. Thaling asked seriously as he nodded to confirm Yuhauran's guess. Yuhauran, did the great mystery heart sutra that you've been cultivating come from the Yushu temple? Yes. Yuhauran admitted with a nod. How did you get it? In my previous life, the son of the heavenly temple of the Yushu temple was hunting me down. After I killed him with poison, I got it from his storage ring, Yuhauran answered honestly. In your previous life, did you have a deep grudge against the Yushu temple? I won't rest until I'm dead. Yuhauran gritted his teeth as he thought about how he had been hunted down by the experts of the Yushu temple for decades in his previous life. In the end, he had no choice but to take the risk and enter the demon god's tomb. Yuhauran, can you promise me that before you break through to the martial venerable realm or before you master the power of triple superposition, you won't easily provoke the Yushu temple? More importantly, you can't offend the head of the Yushu temple, the heavenly temple. Thaling couldn't help but sigh when he saw Yuhauran's deep hatred for the Yushu temple. Then, he asked in a serious tone. Thaling, even if the Yushu temple has a powerful expert like the Emperor Wu, it would be difficult for him to come out in the next 100 years. Why are you so afraid of the Yushu temple? Thaling rarely asked Yuhauran of his own accord unless it was a very serious matter. Therefore, Yuhauran was quite puzzled. Yuhauran, the Yushu temple is different from ordinary families with Einherjar bloodlines. Hearing Yuhauran's puzzled question, Thaling knew that if he didn't explain clearly, it would be difficult to make him feel enough fear of the Yushu temple. Therefore, after taking a deep breath, Thaling began to introduce the Yushu temple in detail. Normally, a family with the bloodline of the Einherjar can only produce one Emperor Wu in 10,000 years. However, the Yushu temple can produce 4 at the same time. Because the founders of the Yushu temple were 4 fellow disciples of the same sect during the Middle Ages. Moreover, among the 4 brothers, 2 of them are twins. These 2 twins are the founders of the Heavenly Temple, the head of the 3 temples of the Yushu temple. Thaling, even if the Yushu temple has 4 Emperor Wu experts in seclusion, how can they pose a fatal threat to me when they can't come out for 100 years? Thaling's explanation made Yuhauran feel extremely pressured. However, when he thought of his previous life, when he was hunted down by the experts of the Yushu Temple, he couldn't help but retort. Yu Haoran, you have practiced the I-Chi turning 3 pure ones technique. You should be very familiar with the art of cloning. Seeing that Yu Haoran still didn't realize how terrifying the Yushu Temple was, Thaling could only reveal a deeper secret. As a Yushu Temple Emperor Wu who has the bloodline of 4 Einherjars, don't tell me that he doesn't have the secret technique of cloning? The secret technique of cloning. When he heard Thaling suddenly mention the secret technique of cloning, Yu Haoran suddenly thought of the top sect, Xiandao school, which had been annihilated in his previous life. Logically speaking, Xiandao school, which was also one of the top 7 sects, shouldn't have been able to hold on for only 3 days before the Yushu Temple slaughtered everyone, even if their overall strength was inferior to the Yushu Temple's. Moreover, according to Thaling's explanation, Xiandao school was also one of the top clans of inheritance. It had existed for a very long time, so it must have hidden experts at the peak of the revered martial artist level, as well as a complete set of upper martial emperor level, or even a top-grade magical instrument. If the Xiandao school was annihilated in 3 days, it could only mean 2 things. Either the Yushu Temple had more powerful helpers, or there was a powerful expert at the level of Emperor Wu who had been secretly using the secret technique of cloning. Thaling, you know how I, Yu Haoran, am. I can only say that I will try my best not to offend the people of the Yushu Temple, but I can't guarantee that I will. Yu Haoran forcefully suppressed the panic in his heart caused by his conjecture. He was a little depressed as he gave his promise. After all, the trajectory of fate is not something that you and I can control. After his rebirth, everything had started anew. Yu Haoran had chosen to forget most of the things that had happened in his previous life and let fate take its course. However, there were a few things that he couldn't let go of, and he swore that he would do them in this life. He had already done the first thing, which was to kill the first elder of the Yu clan who had humiliated him and his sister, Yusiki. The second thing was something that he didn't have the ability to do at the moment, but he had been working hard to destroy the Yushu Temple at all costs. After all, almost half of the disasters that he had suffered in his previous life were caused by the Yushu Temple. All right, let fate take its course. According to Yu Haoran's casual personality, it was very rare for him to make such a promise. And this promise wasn't because he was afraid of the Yushu Temple, but because he didn't want to worry himself too much. Therefore, Thaling didn't ask for more, and continued to talk about the third-tier inherited clans. The third-tier inherited clans inherit the bloodline of ancient divine beasts. They can continuously activate the blood essence of ancient divine beasts through their own cultivation, and finally reappear the glory of ancient divine beasts. After hearing Thaling's description of the third-tier inherited clans, Yu Haoran said with some disdain, Thaling, from what you've said, it sounds like the third-tier inherited clans are exactly the same as the ancient divine beasts' bloodline. Yes and no. Thaling first nodded, then shook his head, and continued to explain. Yes, it's because the third-tier inherited clans are indeed the same as the ancient divine beasts. They need to continuously activate the blood essence of ancient divine beasts in their bloodline to obtain the bloodline inheritance of ancient divine beasts. No, it's because the third-tier inherited clans are a group of terrifying people who have inherited the strengths of both ancient divine beasts and humans. Speaking of this, Thaling pointed at the black bear behind him and asked, Yu Haoran, if everything goes well, how long will it take for the black bear to completely activate the ancestral bloodline in its body from birth to the end? If you count carefully, I'm afraid that even 1,000,000 years is considered short. He had once talked to the black bear about the activation of the ancestral bloodline in its body, and the figure of 1,000,000 was said by the bear itself. But for the third-tier inherited clans, it will only take tens of thousands of years to completely activate the ancestral bloodline in their body. At this point, the tower spirit reminded him with a solemn expression. More importantly, because the third-tier inherited clans have inherited most of the advantages of the ancient divine beast's bloodline, including a long lifespan. Yu Haoran, as you know, Wu Zun's lifespan is less than 5,000 years, and Emperor Wu's lifespan is less than 10,000 years. But for the third-tier inherited clans, a lifespan of 35,000 years is normal. There are even powerhouses like Emperor Wu who have lived for more than 100,000 years. Sizzle. Chapter 873. Beside the lake. Yu Haoran, are you surprised? Thaling teased when he heard Yu Haoran's gasp. Thaling, could it be that they have more powerful means? Yu Haoran asked in disbelief. Most of the top divine beasts in the ancient times were above the martial god realm. They truly had the power of a god. As the third-tier inheritance family of the divine beasts, they would not be restricted by the bloodline inheritance. With their long lifespan, combined with the advantage of humans' rapid improvement in cultivation, the martial honor and Emperor Wu's realm would not be a problem for them. Thaling, you don't have to ask. Unless my cultivation can exceed Emperor Wu's realm, I would never provoke a third-tier inheritance family. Without needing Thaling's reminder, Yu Haoran took the initiative to give his guarantee. Yu Haoran, actually, I'm not worried about third-tier inheritance families, because third-tier inheritance families are completely challenging the Heavenly Ways rules. In the past, the Heavenly Ways rules were not complete, so they could still be tolerated in the Tianxian continent. But now, as the Heavenly Ways rules are gradually becoming more complete, the Tianxian continent's supervision is getting stricter. So, as third-tier inheritance families that defy the natural order, what they really need to consider is how to protect themselves under the supervision of the Heavenly Ways rules. Seeing that Yu Haoran did not need to be reminded not to offend the third-tier inheritance families, Thaling smiled and comforted him. I see. Yu Haoran could not help but heave a sigh of relief at Thaling's comforting words. After all, the existence of third-tier inherited families did not give these ordinary geniuses with amazing talents a chance to survive. At the same time, Yu Haoran also realized that he knew too little about the Tianxian continent in his previous life. He had always thought that the inheritance families only had complete martial honor and emperor artifact. Now, it seemed that the inheritance family's true power was far beyond his imagination. Therefore, he had to try his best to change some of his views from his previous life and re-examine his attitude toward the major forces in the Tianxian continent. Master, I'm sorry. Just as Yu Haoran was trying to change his opinion, Black Bear's weak voice suddenly came from behind him. Black Bear, you didn't do anything wrong. There's no need to apologize to me. Yu Haoran reminded him as he hurriedly got up and inspected Black Bear's injuries. After a careful inspection, Yu Haoran heaved a sigh of relief and comforted him. I'm all right. It's just that I've overdrawn my soul and bloodline. I just need to use some top-quality pills and rest for a while to recover. Master, if you think highly of me, Black Bear, I would like to sign a pet beast contract with you. If he had not been greedy for the breakthrough of grade, he would have left the cave as soon as possible. He would not have been discovered by the powerhouses of Yuan School. That way, he would not have been injured and would not have brought trouble to Yu Haoran. Now, in the face of the trouble he caused, Yu Haoran not only did not get angry, but also immediately tried to find a way to help him recover. This moved Black Bear, and he finally made a decision. In the face of Black Bear's proposal, Yu Haoran suddenly hesitated. Because Black Bear was not his ideal pet beast. What he really wanted was a pet beast with a majestic appearance that gave people a strong visual effect. Moreover, it had the potential to advance to the second stage of the Emperor realm or even the first stage of the God realm in the future. However, seeing the expectation in Black Bear's eyes, Yu Haoran could not refuse flatly. Yu Haoran agreed to Black Bear's request. Just as Yu Haoran fell into hesitation, Thaling suddenly spoke in his sea of consciousness. Why? Yu Haoran asked somewhat unwillingly. After you sign a pet beast contract with Black Bear, you will know why I asked you to do this, Thaling said mysteriously. Okay. Thaling's reminder was only one reason. Yuhauran did not have the heart to disappoint Black Bear. This was the real reason why he made up his mind. Black Bear, have you thought it through? Yuhauran asked solemnly as he walked directly to Black Bear's head. Master, I have thought it through, Black Bear replied in a firm tone. Okay. Nodding, Yuhauran's 10 fingers quickly formed a seal and soon condensed an imprint similar to an ancient totem. Go. Yuhauran pointed his finger at Black Bear's forehead and shouted softly. Then, the totem-like imprint directly entered Black Bear's sea of consciousness and cut off a part of its soul. When the totemic imprint left Black Bear's sea of consciousness and appeared in midair, Yuhauran directly cut his finger and forced out a drop of blood to flick at the totemic imprint in midair. Contract done. After the blood merged with the totemic imprint, Yuhauran roared. Then, the totemic imprint that merged with the blood and Black Bear's soul automatically split in half. Half of the totemic imprint entered Yuhauran's sea of consciousness and merged with his soul. And just as the totemic imprint merged with his soul, a kind of memory belonging to Black Bear's inherited bloodline rushed into his mind. Thaling, I understand. After reading the memory of Black Bear's inherited bloodline, Yuhauran said with a hint of excitement. No regrets? Thaling asked with a smile. No regrets, Yuhauran replied in a firm tone. Just as Yuhauran expressed his attitude of not regretting, the other half of the totemic imprint floated above Black Bear. Then, the other half of the totemic imprint gradually began to expand until it could cover the entire Black Bear. A strong suction force directly sucked Black Bear lying flat on the grass into the totemic imprint. Then, the totemic imprint quickly shrunk and imprinted on Yuhauran's left wrist. Yuhauran, as a reward for the Heavenly Axiom's rules, an independent space for the beast pet. Although the special energy in the pet space can speed up the recovery of Black Bear's injuries, it has overdrawn too much of its soul and bloodline after all. The special energy is not very effective for the recovery of soul and bloodline, so you will need to continue to use the best elixirs to help it recover quickly. When the totemic imprint of Black Bear's totemic imprint was on Yuhauran's wrist, he quickly reminded him for fear that he did not understand the Thaling of the pet space. I know. Nodding, Yuhauran indicated that he understood. At the same time, he took out more than 10 elixirs that could be used to recover the soul and replenish blood essence and pressed them directly on the imprint on his wrist. Without any obstruction, the elixirs directly entered the pet space. Black Bear, since we have signed the pet beast contract, you and I can communicate telepathically. After sending the elixirs into the pet space, Yuhauran raised his arm and said to the totemic imprint, the moment you completely recover, inform me immediately so that you can come out in time. Master, I understand. Chapter 874. Sorry, I'm stuck. I've been delayed for more than an hour. By the lake. Yuhauran, do you plan to leave this place, or do you plan to continue boating on the lake to relax? Thaling had dealt with all the troubles and told Yuhauran all the secrets he wanted to know. Now, he wanted to know what Yuhauran's next plan was. Let's leave, Yuhauran said helplessly after looking around. Although the aura of the 7 martial sages from the Yuan sect had caused countless ships to be destroyed, the young men and women standing by the lake did not choose to leave. Instead, most of them cast their gazes towards him. The feeling of being stared at made him feel very uncomfortable, so he planned to leave. If that's the case, let's go to the mountain 15 kilometers northeast of the lake, Thaling immediately suggested when he saw Yuhauran planning to leave. Why? Yuhauran immediately asked. After all, it was not suitable for him to continue improving his cultivation in his current state. He needed to find a way to relax and get rid of the violent emotions in his body caused by his rapid increase in cultivation. He had used his divine sense to check the mountain that Thowling had mentioned earlier. Although his divine sense could only extend to 15 kilometers with his current cultivation, and he could not clearly see the situation in the mountain, he could sense that there were several powerful 5th-rank Emperor Realm exotic beasts hidden in the mountain. Instead of choosing a scenic place to relax, he took the risk and barged into the mountain where the 5th-rank Emperor Realm exotic beasts lived. How could Yu Haoran not be puzzled by Thowling's suggestion? Refine the copper bell, Thowling explained. That's great. Yu Haoran could not help but exclaim excitedly. He would refine the embryo of the copper bell technique, then use the secret method to improve the grade and power of the copper bell. Finally, he would refine it into his natal magic weapon. This was what he had always wanted to do since his rebirth. Forcefully suppressing the excitement in his heart, Yu Haoran was about to take to the air and leave this place. A handsome young man in his 20s with a gentle temperament suddenly strode towards him. As he walked, the handsome young man smiled and called out, "Young hero, please stop." "What's up?" Perhaps it was because of his gentle attitude that made people feel very comfortable. Perhaps it was because of the black bear's special background that he was in a good mood. Yu Haoran asked in a relatively calm manner as he faced the handsome young man who was walking quickly towards him. "Young hero, you've traveled thousands of miles to come here. You must be here to watch the competition between the two heroes." About 2 meters away from Yu Haoran, the handsome young man suddenly stopped and asked a question that made Yu Haoran feel baffled. "What's a competition between two heroes?" Yu Haoran asked, puzzled. The handsome youth frowned slightly when he saw that Yu Haoran didn't even know about the competition between the two heroes that caused a sensation in the Southern Territory. However, when he saw Yu Haoran's face gradually turn gloomy, he quickly explained with a smile. The so-called competition between the two heroes refers to the competition between the two most outstanding young heroes of the Southern Territory. The most outstanding young heroes of the Southern Territory? After hearing the handsome young man's explanation, Yu Haoran was shocked and asked with a hint of excitement in his voice. Could it be Gu Liangzi, known as the Gentleman's Sword, and the armless swordsman, Gu Quan? The Gentleman's Sword, Gu Liangzi, came from the Gu Liang clan, a first-rate family of inheritance. He was the most outstanding representative of the younger generation of the Gu Liang clan. He was only 20 years old this year. Not only was his cultivation at the peak of the 9th grade martial royal realm, but he had also successfully comprehended the law of inches, which could increase the power of his swordsmanship by 3 to 5 times. At the same time, he was also a demon-level genius who could challenge a martial sage expert. The armless swordsman, Gu Quan, was a wandering cultivator who walked alone in the Jianghu. However, at the same time, he was a person who refused to admit defeat and was unwilling to bow to fate. He was a person who dared to risk his life. Now, he was only 20 years old. Not only was his cultivation at the peak of the 9th grade martial royal realm, but he had also comprehended the law of severing in advance, which could increase the power of his swordsmanship by 3 to 5 times. Once, with the help of the law of severing, he had killed a first-grade martial sage expert in the solid stage. The reason why Yu Haoran was interested in these two people was because of the Hidden Dragon ranking competition in October. Not only did these two people successfully enter the top 100, but they were also ranked 49th and 50th in the end. In his previous life, he was limited by his cultivation. Not only was he not qualified to participate in the Hidden Dragon ranking competition, but he also did not have the strength and opportunity to observe the Hidden Dragon ranking. Therefore, he knew nothing about the strength of the top 100 contestants of the Hidden Dragon ranking and what kind of powerful techniques they had. If he could watch the competition between Gu Liangzi and Gu Quan in advance, He would be able to understand the situation of his opponents in the Hidden Dragon ranking competition in 10 months. It would also be convenient for him to make a reasonable cultivation plan based on the situation he knew. That's right. Seeing that Yu Haoran had heard the names of these 2 talents, the handsome young man nodded with a smile. When and where? Yu Haoran immediately asked. In 3 days, Peach Blossom Town, above the Peach Blossom Orchard. Thank you for telling me. I will definitely go and watch the competition in 3 days. After leaving his attitude, Yu Haoran directly rose into the air and left the scene like lightning. Refining the bronze bell was only the first step. Next, he needed to use a secret method to increase the grade and power of the bronze bell, which would take a certain amount of time. Therefore, in order to be able to watch the competition between the 2 talents smoothly, he had to seize the time to refine and upgrade the bronze bell. Looking at Yu Haoran directly leaving in the air, the smile on the handsome young man's face was instantly replaced by a gloomy expression. In a situation where they did not know each other, there was only one reason why the handsome young man was so enthusiastic to tell Yu Haoran this news. He wanted to rope him in and let him help him fulfill his wish. Miss, are you okay? Seeing the handsome young man's gloomy face, a middle-aged man of about 40 years old instantly appeared beside him and asked carefully. Wang Hua, how many times have I told you? Young master is now a woman disguised as a man. Outside, you have to call me young master. The handsome young man was already in a very bad mood. After hearing that his subordinate had made such an obvious mistake, he ordered with a cold expression. If you make such a mistake next time, you can directly kill yourself. Yes, young master. I promise that I will not make such a mistake again. Facing the handsome young man's cold order, the middle-aged man, who was already at the peak of the 3rd grade martial saint, secretly breathed a sigh of relief and hurriedly promised. Now go to Peach Blossom Town and wait for the surnamed Yu to appear. Looking up in the direction where Yu Haoran disappeared, the handsome young man gritted his teeth and ordered. Chapter 875. For Yu Haoran, who was as fast as lightning, the 30-kilometer journey only took a few blinks of an eye, and he successfully arrived at the mountain peak. This time, his goal in entering the mountain peak was only to refine and upgrade the bronze bell, not to use exotic beasts to increase his strength and consolidate his cultivation base. As such, when he stepped into the mountain peak, Yu Haoran did his best to conceal his aura to prevent exotic beasts from discovering him, which would lead to unnecessary slaughter. Fortunately, the cave suitable for refining and upgrading the bronze bell was halfway up the mountain. There weren't any exotic beasts with high grades around, allowing him to enter the cave smoothly. Although the cave wasn't very big, it had an abundance of spiritual qi. Moreover, the original owner of the cave was a 7th-rank, 3rd-rank Grandmaster Realm Star Spot Cat that paid more attention to hygiene. As such, the entire cave was very clean. After using his aura to stun the Star Spot Cat, Yu Haoran chose the spot where the Star Spot Cat usually meditated and sat down cross-legged. Yu Haoran, here you go. Thaling reminded Yu Haoran when it saw that everything was ready. Then, it directly gave him a 3-meter-tall bell that was dark yellow all over. Countless stars revolved around it, while the earth, fire, wind, and water revolved around it. Yu Haoran was completely stunned when he saw the 3-meter-tall bronze bell given to him by Thaling. Thaling, you must have a good relationship with that bronze bell. Yu Haoran guessed after recovering from his shock. The sun, moon, and stars were densely packed, and the earth, fire, wind, and water were baked. The appearance of the bronze bell in front of him was exactly the same as the bronze bell he had seen in the Forbidden Land in his previous life. To be able to reproduce the bronze bell's final form so perfectly, it wasn't something that could be replicated simply by looking at it a few times. That was why Yu Haoran suspected that Thaling had an unusual relationship with the bronze bell. Yu Haoran, It's not that I don't want to tell you the origin of the bronze bell, but it's related to the secrets of the destruction of the ancient and Middle Ages. Even the martial gods of the ancient and Middle Ages didn't know the true origin of the bronze bell, let alone you. Thaling explained with an unusually serious expression when faced with Yu Haoran's guess. Now, the only thing I can tell you is that I once fought alongside the weapon spirit of the bronze bell. Thaling, don't worry. Yu Haoran could feel a trace of sadness in Thaling's serious tone. He knew that the weapon spirit of the bronze bell didn't have a good ending. Thaling, Yu Haoran old, Thaling, 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 if you don't want to talk about the origin of the magic weapon, I won't bring it up again. Yu Haoran, thank you. Thaling was very touched by Yu Haoran's understanding. First, Yu Haoran took out several level 4 spirit stones from his storage ring, as well as a few pills that could quickly restore his spirit and Yuanli. Then, he took a deep breath and immediately formed a seal with his 10 fingers. Yu Haoran entered the process of refining the bronze bell. Just as Yu Haoran's seal was imprinted on the bronze bell, a dead planet hundreds of millions of light years away from the cave suddenly shook violently. Following the violent shaking of the planet, countless gray rocks were directly shaken into powder. A strong gust of wind blew, and countless gray powder was swept up by the wind, revealing the dark yellow surface of the planet beneath the powder. Mind calling, it seems that Small Tower used his superb refining techniques to imitate my original body. Just as the dark yellow surface of the planet was revealed, an old and weak voice suddenly sounded from all directions. Now, my original body is about to shatter, and my spirit is on the verge of collapse. Perhaps the dark bell refined by Small Tower is the only way for me to be reborn. As the voice muttered to itself, a small dark yellow bell gradually condensed on the surface of the dead planet. The small dark yellow bell quickly spun on the spot. As it spun faster and faster, one dark yellow seal after another appeared around the small bell. When the number of dark yellow seals reached 36, the small dark yellow bell immediately stopped spinning. Small Tower, whether or not Third Brother can be reborn smoothly will all depend on the magic weapon you refined. As the voice that was full of expectation disappeared, the small dark yellow bell suddenly exploded. The terrifying power of the explosion directly sent the 36 dark yellow seals into the Tianxian continent. What a pity! Seeing the 36 dark yellow seals fall in different directions of the Tianxian continent, a sigh came from the dead planet. I hope that the master that Small Tower follows is a guy who likes to adventure. Otherwise, if I can't collect enough dark yellow seals within 100 years, my bell of chaos will completely disappear from this world. After the sigh ended, the gray powder that was originally swept up by the wind fell back on the planet, covering the dark yellow body that was just revealed. Inside the cave, as one seal after another fell on the bronze bell magic weapon, a weak connection gradually formed between Yu Haoran and the bronze bell in front of him. As more and more seals merged into the bronze bell magic weapon, the weak connection continued to strengthen, and finally formed a complete mental connection, as if it was his own body. After finishing the seal of refining, Yu Haoran softly shouted at the bronze bell magic weapon in front of him, "Withdraw." With the word "withdraw," the bronze bell magic weapon that was originally more than 3 meters tall instantly shrank to the size of a small bell, and directly entered his sea of consciousness, and then merged into his spirit. Yu Haoran, how do you feel? Seeing the bronze bell magic weapon merge into Yu Haoran's spirit, Thaling seemed calm, but in fact he was very nervous. Carefully feeling the bronze bell magic weapon that merged into his spirit, Yu Haoran looked shocked and exclaimed, "It can stretch out like a purple rod, and it can cover the sky and contain the earth. It can blast the sky and shake the earth." Then, he couldn't help but question, "Thaling, is this really a bronze bell embryo that you casually refined in 5 days? How is it's passable?" Thaling replied arrogantly, In this regard, Yuhaoran could only roll his eyes at him, and then take out the bronze bell magic weapon again. Yuhaoran, what are you trying to do? Today's bronze bell magic weapon, apart from being able to freely change its size and being relatively sturdy, did not have any offensive or defensive power. Therefore, he was very puzzled by Yuhaoran's action of taking out the bronze bell magic weapon again. Refining weapons. Yuhaoran replied simply, and then took out 99 low-grade Zone realm magic weapons from his storage ring. Closing his eyes, he carefully recalled the secret refining method that he had accidentally obtained in his previous life, the furnace of heaven and earth. After memorizing the secret method of the furnace of heaven and earth, Yuhaoran picked up a low-grade Zone realm sword and threw it directly into the air. Chapter 876. Inside the Cave. After the Copper Bell Dharma artifact enveloped the low-grade Grandmaster Realm Sword, Yuhaoran immediately used the artifact refining secret technique to control the Copper Bell and directly shattered the sword. Then, the devouring power formed by the secret refining technique directly absorbed the essence of the shattered sword into the bronze bell. After absorbing the essence of the first low-grade Zone Realm Sword, the originally dim yellow color of the Copper Bell deepened slightly. In the sea of consciousness, looking at the bronze bell that had deepened slightly, Phalanx's expression gradually became serious. When Yuhaoran threw out the second and third low-grade Zone Realm magic weapons, the Copper Bell also absorbed the essence of the second and third low-grade Zone Realm magic weapons. A thought suddenly flashed through the Tower Spirit's mind. The worldly cauldron refinement technique. The Tower Spirit exclaimed in shock as it stood up. Phalang, you also know about the secret refining technique of the great furnace of heaven and earth? Yuhaoran asked in surprise after hearing Phalanx's words. In his previous life, when he obtained the secret refining technique of the great furnace of heaven and earth, the remnant divine will of a senior at the scene had mentioned it. Whether it was during the ancient times or the Middle Ages, no one knew the secret of the great furnace of heaven and earth. No one knew the secret of the great furnace of heaven and earth. This was because the secret refining technique of the great furnace of heaven and earth was a heaven-defying secret refining technique, created by him alone. He was the top refining master of the ancient antiquity age, and one of the few who was able to survive the crisis of the ancient antiquity age and the Middle Age until the modern age, Phalang said with a wry smile as he sat cross-legged again. Amazing! To be able to cross 3 eras, survive the second calamity of the destruction of heaven and earth, and create such a heaven-defying refining method as the great furnace of heaven and earth. Yuhaoran was shocked after hearing the introduction of the Tower Spirit to the Old Man of Heaven Wasteland. Yuhaoran, the previous weapon spirit of the victor, had a good relationship with the great furnace of heaven and earth. I once heard him mention this secret refining technique that relied on devouring the essence of other weapons to advance. However, at that time, countless experts who were proficient in refining thought that the great furnace of heaven and earth was crazy. How could he create such a heaven-defying technique that went against the rules of refining weapons? After all, in addition to the fusion of different materials, the most important part of a weapon's composition is the formation inside the weapon. Therefore, at that time, countless experts who were proficient in refining mocked and ridiculed him, including my previous weapon spirit. At this point, Phalang could not help but laugh bitterly. I really did not expect that after experiencing the trials of the ancient antiquity age and the Middle Age, this heaven-defying technique that completely went against the rules of refining weapons was actually created by him. Hearing Phalang's description, Yuhaoran could not help but frown and ask, Phalang, although the secret refining technique of the great furnace of heaven and earth is heaven-defying, is it really as difficult as you said? Yuhaoran, you are not a weapon refiner, so you don't understand the mysteries of refining weapons. Hearing Yuhaoran's slight contempt for the secret refining technique of the great furnace of heaven and earth, Thaling immediately criticized and explained unhappily. Refining weapons is different from refining pills. Pills can be refined by neutralizing different medicinal powers and using special methods to fuse and improve the grade of the pills. However, the real core method of refining weapons is the construction and ordering of the formation inside the weapon. There can't be any deviation. Thaling, just now I used the secret refining technique of the great furnace of heaven and earth to improve the grade and power of the copper bell, and then combined it with your explanation of refining weapons. Facing Thaling's criticism, Yuhauran was not convinced and retorted. I think in ancient times you all fell into a misunderstanding, or perhaps you lacked a flash of inspiration. Yuhauran, quickly say it. Although Yuhauran was not a weapon refiner and did not know much about refining weapons, he had explored countless relics and forbidden areas in his previous life, and had come into contact with many secrets that even he did not know. Perhaps he could explain the real reason why the old man of heaven and earth created the secret refining technique of the great furnace of heaven and earth. Thaling, the flash of inspiration I mentioned just now was referring to the blood demon who created the secret technique of swallowing the heavens and devouring the earth. Yuhauran reminded. The secret technique of swallowing the heavens and devouring the earth. Yuhauran's reminder reminded Thaling of the heaven-defying ability of the secret technique of swallowing everything, and he immediately fell into deep thought. After waiting for a few minutes and seeing that there was no response from Thaling, Yuhauran knew that he must be using the secret technique of swallowing to study the reason the old man of heaven and earth had created the secret refining technique. Therefore, he did not continue to wait for Thaling's reply, but continued to use the low-grade Zone Realm magic weapons to increase the grade and power of the bronze bell. As more and more essence of the low-grade Zone Realm magic weapons were absorbed into the bronze bell, its vibration and devouring power grew stronger and stronger. In the beginning, it could only shatter and devour 1 or 2 low-grade Zone Realm magic weapons. Now, the bronze bell could shatter and devour 7 low-grade Zone Realm magic weapons in one go. The 99 low-grade Zone Realm magic weapons were quickly consumed by the bronze bell's increasing vibration and devouring power. After the last low-grade Zone Realm magic weapon was devoured by the bronze bell's body instantly tripled in size, and the sun, moon, and stars on the bell shone brightly, and the mysteries of earth, fire, wind, and water began to deepen. When the size of the bronze bell had completely stabilized, the sun, moon, and stars dimmed again, and the earth, fire, wind, and water returned to normal, the bronze bell automatically vibrated and let out a low rumble. Not good! Thaling, who had been awakened by the low rumble of the bronze bell, immediately warned after realizing that something was wrong. Yuhauran, the cave is about to be shattered by the rumble, hurry up and leave the cave. As soon as he withdrew his consciousness, the bronze bell immediately shrank and returned to his sea of consciousness. At the same time, Yuhauran used his fastest speed to leave the cave before the rubble and powder fell from above. Thaling, the bronze bell has only just reached the low-grade Zone Realm, and that was just the sound produced when it was upgraded. Yuhauran said with a shocked expression as he pointed at the mountain peak that was collapsing due to the collapse of the cave. This is too terrifying. Yuhauran, you must know that the bronze bell that I refined was infused with 64 top refining materials. In the face of Yuhauran's shocked exclamation, Thaling explained as if it was normal. Moreover, it just devoured the essence of 99 low-grade Zone Realm magic weapons, so it is completely normal for it to have such power. Chapter 877. In front of the mountain peak. Yuhauran, is it true that the bronze bell needs to devour 99 weapons of the same level every time it advances? That's right. Yuhauran nodded and confirmed. Sizzle. After getting Yuhauran's confirmation, Thaling could not help but gasp and remind him worriedly. Yuhauran, collecting Master Realm, King Realm, and Emperor Realm artifacts isn't a problem at all. With our current strength, it won't be difficult to collect them. But where are we going to find thousands of weapons of the Saint, Venerable, and Emperor realms? Pagoda Spirit, as the saying goes, when the car reaches the mountain, there will be a way. When the boat reaches the bridge, it will cross the bridge. Maybe by the time the bronze bell advances to the Saint, Venerable, and Emperor realms, you and I will have found 99 weapons. Compared to Thallink's worries, Yuhauran was quite relaxed and comforted him. Moreover, with the power that the bronze bell displayed just now, maybe it will have the power of an Emperor Realm weapon when it advances to the highest level of the Saint Realm. Then, why should I be in a hurry to improve its level and power? Seeing that Yuhauran had thought it through so thoroughly, Thallink could only shake his head with a wry smile and did not say anything more. Due to his low cultivation in his previous life, he did not know much about the Tianxian continent. He did not know about the real dangers of the Tianxian continent, nor did he know that in the distant starry sky, there were some old immortals from the ancient, middle, and recent times. As the rules of the heavenly Tao were gradually perfected, some experts who had long disappeared in the long river of history would gradually appear on the Tianxian continent to fight for the only chance of survival. In the future, when you grow bigger, you can cover the sky and the sun. When you shrink, you can blend into the sand and dust. You will have the strongest defense in the world and unparalleled attack power. Taking out the bronze bell that had merged with his divine soul, Yuhauran looked forward to the bronze bell's future abilities while thinking quickly. Having such a perfect shape and ability is just what I want. At this point, Yuhauran pointed at the bronze bell with a solemn expression. From now on, you shall be called the Rui Bell. Upon hearing the name Yuhauran gave it, the copper bell floating in the air immediately emitted a faint mysterious yellow aura. Obviously, it was very satisfied with the name Yuhauran had just given it. Thalling, who was in his knowledge sea, was stunned for a moment before he sneered in disdain. Yuhauran, you can be considered a cultured person who has read a lot, but you actually gave this copper bell such a vulgar name. The result of this will not only lower your status as a grandmaster, but also damage my Thallink's reputation in the field of refining. In the face of Thallink's ridicule, Yuhauran retorted shamelessly, I make the decision on my weapon. I can name it whatever I want. In fact, with his cultural upbringing, no matter if it was elegant or domineering, no matter if it was exquisite or majestic, he could easily come up with dozens of nice names. But there was a thorn in his heart, a thorn that he had once looked down upon. He wanted to use the Rui Bell in his hand to completely pull out the thorn that had once hurt him. You! In the face of the shameless Yuhauran, Thalling was suddenly speechless. Ouch! Just as Yuhauran put away the Rui Bell again, an angry roar suddenly came from the mountain in front of him. It seems that the collapse of the mountain caused by the collapse of the cave just now has angered the real overlord of this mountain. Hearing the angry roar, Thalling gently scanned with his divine thoughts, and then smiled at Yuhauran. Yuhauran, if you don't want to fight, you'd better leave here immediately. Without any hesitation, Yuhauran turned and left directly, and then went straight to Peach Blossom Town thousands of miles away. Peach Blossom Town, located 70 miles east of Guangling City, was a town surrounded by countless peach blossom trees. In Peach Blossom Town, not only was the scenery beautiful and the spiritual qi abundant, but the whole town was also filled with the fragrance of peach blossoms. Rather than calling it a town, it was better to call it a holy place for high officials and nobles to go for a spring vacation. Because the whole town was divided into different areas, each area was full of courtyards, streams, and pavilions. It was a place of wealth and splendor, which was simply not a place that ordinary people could afford to live in. In March and April, the peach blossoms would bloom. Yuhauran, who had hurried over, floated in the sky above Peach Blossom Town. Looking down at the town surrounded by countless blooming peach blossoms, A relaxed expression immediately appeared on his face. Yu Haoran, there are still 6 days before the opening of the secret territory. Why don't you stay in Peach Blossom Town during this time to cultivate and get rid of the tyrannical emotions in your body? Thaling, who was also attracted by the beautiful scenery of Peach Blossom Town, could not help but suggest. If nothing unexpected happens, I will rest here for a few days, Yu Haoran said with some uncertainty. This was because, regardless of whether he was a jinx or Thaling was a jinx, as long as they appeared, it often meant trouble. Therefore, he did not dare to guarantee that he would be able to live in Peach Blossom Town smoothly. Young hero Yu. Just as Yu Haoran and Thaling were discussing which courtyard to choose as the next place to cultivate, a surprised voice called out to them. Looking through the gaps of the peach blossoms, Yu Haoran saw that in an elegant courtyard in the center of the town, the handsome young man who had reminded him of the martial arts competition was standing in the courtyard's pavilion and waving at him. Frowning slightly, a trace of hesitation flashed through Yu Haoran's heart. However, after seeing the anticipation in the handsome young man's eyes, he finally let out a long sigh and flew into the courtyard. Young hero Yu, I didn't expect you to be so punctual, the handsome young man said with a smile as he watched Yu Haoran striding toward the pavilion. There's something I don't know if I should say. After entering the pavilion and looking at the handsome young man's snow-white skin, Yu Haoran finally decided to tell the truth after much consideration. Young hero Yu, please speak. The handsome young man gestured with his left hand with a smile. In the Tianxian continent, apart from some special techniques and treasures, there are only a few ways to conceal the change between genders. Simply by changing one's attire and voice, not only will it not achieve the goal of changing one's gender, but it will also attract the attention of others. Looking at the handsome young man who thought himself infallible, Yu Haoran directly revealed the other party's true identity. The smile on his face instantly disappeared, and a faint murderous aura filled the handsome young man's eyes. I'm just speaking the truth. Sensing the murderous aura in the handsome young man's eyes, Yu Haoran shook his head and kindly reminded him as he turned to leave the pavilion. Chapter 878. Working overtime at the last minute, I'll check the book review section for the November update. Peach Blossom Town, in the courtyard. Young hero Yu, please wait. Seeing Yu Haoran turn to leave the pavilion, the handsome young man hurriedly urged him to stay. Miss, ever since I, Yu Haoran, made my debut, no matter if it was a quasi-martial honorable or an ordinary person without the strength to truss a chicken, as long as they dared to kill me, now, they've all turned into a pile of dirt. After hearing the handsome young man's request to stay, Yu Haoran stopped in his tracks and reminded him in a calm tone with a hint of coldness. Seeing that you took the initiative to remind me of the martial arts competition 3 days ago, I'll let you live today. Then, he directly rose into the air, intending to leave the courtyard. Young hero Yu, I was wrong, I apologize. Seeing Yu Haoran rise into the air, the handsome young man gritted his teeth and took the initiative to admit his mistake. I'm sorry. Hearing the other party take the initiative to admit his mistake and apologize, Yu Haoran laughed coldly in his heart, then returned to the pavilion. Who are you? Yu Haoran asked indifferently as he sat down on the stone squat in the pavilion. My surname is Dongfang, and my name is Ting. Seeing Yu Haoran sit down without waiting for her, the host, to invite him, Dongfang Ting angrily introduced herself. Among the clans with surnames in the Tianxian continent, only the Nanling Mountain Range and the eastern region's Morning Sun Peak have clans with the surname Dongfang. Hearing Dongfang Ting's introduction, Yu Haoran slightly raised his eyebrows, then pretended to be thinking, then pointed out 2 possible places where the other party might have been born. I wonder if you were born in the southern region or the eastern region? Are you stupid? Faced with Yu Haoran's interrogation, Dongfang Ting could not help but roll her eyes and mock him. I'm a mere 7th-grade martial king cultivator, How could I directly cross the entire central region and appear in the southern region's peach blossom town? Ignoring Dongfang Ting's mockery, Yu Haoran said with a cold smile. It's hard to say. After all, who doesn't know that the Dongfang family of the eastern region is not only a famous family of inheritance, but also one of the few holy lands in the profound sky continent that can control the teleportation formation. How do you know so much about the eastern region's Dongfang clan? Dongfang Ting, who had already sat down, immediately stood up in shock after hearing Yu Haoran's evaluation of the Dongfang family in the eastern region. Just as Dongfang Ting stood up in shock, a middle-aged man at the peak of the third-grade martial saint instantly appeared in the pavilion and glared at Yu Haoran. Put away the anger in your heart. Otherwise, I will let you enjoy the treatment of the 7 martial saints of the Yuan sect. Yu Haoran threatened the middle-aged man with a murderous look. When he thought of how the 7 martial saints of the Yuan sect had been dissected and analyzed, a trace of fear immediately emerged in the middle-aged man's eyes. Wang Hua, stand down. Dongfang Ting, who had finally calmed down from the shock in her heart, hurriedly reprimanded Wang Hua when she saw him barge into the pavilion and clash with Yu Haoran. Yes, young master. Wang Hua hurriedly responded and left the pavilion at lightning speed. However, when he stood beside the flower bushes about 20 meters away from the pavilion, he realized that his back was already drenched in cold sweat. Speak. Seeing that Dongfang Ting had sat down again, Yu Haoran got straight to the point. Young hero Yu, what do you mean? Dongfang Ting was slightly taken aback and asked, pretending to be confused. Dongfang Ting, I am a rather impatient person and I like to do things in a straightforward manner. Therefore, it is best that you don't beat around the bush. Otherwise, you might refuse to help because you feel unhappy in your heart. Yu Haoran reminded her threateningly. Yu Haoran's reminder was already so clear. If she continued to play the fool, it might really be like what he said and end up making a fool of herself. I want to make a bet with someone. The bet is that each side will send an expert to fight. The winner will win and the loser will lose. If that's the case, you want me to be your hired thug? Yu Haoran pointed out with a cold smile. Wrong. Dongfang Ting purposely reminded him with her beautiful eyes. A helper, not a hired thug. There is a fundamental difference between the two. 3 questions. Raising his left hand and pointing 3 fingers, Yu Haoran indicated. Young hero Yu, please come in. Seeing that Yu Haoran did not immediately reject her request, Dongfang Ting hurriedly straightened her attitude and listened carefully. Who is the person you are betting with? She retracted a finger. Gu Liang Yi. What is the bet? She retracted a second finger. An incomplete array diagram. When he heard that the bet was an incomplete array diagram, Yu Haoran's eyes immediately flashed. Fortunately, Dongfang Ting, who was focused on asking questions, did not notice. My reward. She retracted a third finger. A level 5, level 9 Qi Shin pill. Miss Dongfang, farewell. Hearing that the reward was only a level 5, level 9 Qi Shin pill, Yu Haoran slammed the stone table and stood up to leave. He did not hesitate to walk out of the pavilion. Young hero Yu, regarding the reward, we can continue to discuss it. Seeing that Yu Haoran had suddenly turned hostile and directly left the pavilion, although Dongfang Ting's heart was filled with hatred, she had no choice but to immediately urge him to stay. Miss Dongfang, I forgot to tell you about my other identity. Yu Haoran stopped in his tracks but did not turn back. He forcefully suppressed his anger and said, I, Yu Haoran, am not only a peak alchemy grandmaster, I can also refine level 4 and level 7 nirvana pills. You took out a level 5 pill that I usually use to feed my pet beast. Are you trying to humiliate me, Yu Haoran? Having said that, Yu Haoran rose into the air and flew out of the courtyard, ignoring Dongfang Ting's pleas. After hearing that Yu Haoran had revealed his identity as a peak alchemy grandmaster before leaving, Dongfang Ting was completely stunned. Seeing Yu Haoran leave the courtyard without hesitation, the pagoda spirit in his sea of consciousness could not help but remind him, Yu Haoran, actually, you can use this opportunity to humiliate him and exchange the request to view the incomplete formation. Thaling, things are not as simple as you think. While dealing with Thaling's question, Yu Haoran observed his surroundings. Finally, his gaze fell on a peach tree with a diameter of more than 2 meters. He slowly landed on the top of the peach tree, then sat down cross-legged and continued to explain Thaling's question. In my past life, I trained in the eastern region for a period of time and had also come into contact with the Dongfang family of the Morning Sun Peak. I know about their history and their heritage, and they are not inferior to the Gu Liang family at all. Chapter 879. Peach Blossom Town. Thaling, as the daughter of the clan leader of the first-rate inheritance family, has gone to a foreign place alone. Only a peak third-grade martial saint is assigned to protect her. Yu Haoran asked with a cold smile. Do you think this is normal? After hearing Yu Haoran's reminder, Thaling immediately spread out her divine sense and carefully observed the situation within a radius of a few hundred kilometers. Finally, she frowned and said, Yu Haoran, that woman Dongfang Ting, seems to only be protected by that martial saint named Wang Hua. That's right. After hearing Thaling's reminder, Yu Haoran was not surprised at all and said with a smile, It seems that Dongfang Ting and Gu Liang Zi are not the only 2 juniors participating in the bet. I'm afraid that the experts of the families behind them are secretly wrestling with each other. If I agree to Dongfang Ting's request, if I win, I will definitely offend the Gu Liang family. If I lose, I will offend the Dongfang family. If that's the case, then I might as well offend Dongfang Ting directly. At least I can calmly face Dongfang Ting's revenge. I see. Yu Haoran's detailed explanation made Thaling deeply feel that the human heart was sinister. At the same time, she was gratified by his keen insight. However, her gratification only lasted for 3 seconds. Thaling could not help but shake her head and smile bitterly. She had just arrived in Peach Blossom Town and had not even had time to take a breather and enjoy the beautiful scenery of the Peach Blossom Garden. If she offended Dongfang Ting of the Dongfang family, wouldn't that prove that Yu Haoran was a jinx? However, despite her bitter smile, Thaling still wanted to know his next plan. I'll continue to stay in Peach Blossom Town and watch the battle between the 2 heroes. Without any hesitation, Yu Haoran made the decision to continue staying. What about Dongfang Ting's threat? Thaling asked. If she's smart enough, she'd better not provoke me. Otherwise, don't blame me for being ruthless. Yu Haoran said with a cold smile. Alright. Ruthlessly destroying a flower would definitely offend the Dongfang clan, but considering that the Dongfang clan's foundation was in the eastern region, it would not pose a fatal threat to Yu Haoran in a short period of time, so Thaling agreed to his decision to continue staying. Whether it was Gu Liang Zi from the Gu Liang clan or the one-armed swordsman Gu Quan, they were both famous young talents in the southern region. Therefore, the sparring between the 2 of them attracted the attention of many people. While Yu Haoran was leaning against a tree trunk, drinking wine and enjoying the beautiful scenery of peach blossoms, more and more experts had come to watch the battle. They were either sitting in a pavilion in the courtyard, floating in the air, or, like Yu Haoran, choosing a peach tree as a resting place. Brat Scram. Good wine and fresh flowers were the most intoxicating atmosphere. Under the influence of this completely relaxed atmosphere, Yu Haoran's violent emotions were quickly calming down. But at this moment, a strong man about 30 years old with a cultivation at the peak of the third-grade martial king suddenly broke this intoxicating atmosphere. Opening his eyes, Yu Haoran looked at the strong man with a cold light flashing in his eyes and said indifferently, "Either kneel down and apologize or die." Ha ha. Hearing Yu Haoran's two choices, the strong man couldn't help but laugh wildly as if he had heard the biggest joke in the world. Brat, I'll give you two choices now. Either kneel down and apologize or die. When the wild laughter ended, the strong man threatened fiercely. It seems that you've made your choice. Putting away the gourd containing the 100 flowers fragrance in his hand, Yu Haoran stood up and directly activated the blood essence of the large power King Kong ape in his acupoint. A few days ago, through the battle with the 5th stage Martial King exotic beast, with his current strength, even without the help of the exotic beast's blood essence, it was not impossible for him to defeat the strong man with a cultivation at the peak of the 3rd grade Martial King. However, he would need at least dozens of moves to defeat the other party. And in his current state, it was not suitable for him to be entangled with his opponent for too long. Otherwise, the tyrannical emotions that had been suppressed with great difficulty recently would probably affect his state of mind again. Moreover, he still had two very important things that he needed to do with a calm state of mind. Therefore, he could only use the blood essence of the large power King Kong ape to end the battle quickly. Brat, it seems that you've already made your choice. The energy fluctuations formed by Yu Haoran activating the blood essence of the exotic beast let the brawny man know that the young man in front of him was planning to fight to the death. A mere peak of the 8th grade Martial King actually dared to make a move against him, a peak of the 3rd grade Martial King. A sense of humiliation from being looked down upon made him laugh sinisterly. However, when Yu Haoran's body quickly increased in size and quickly turned into a mighty large power King Kong ape, the brawny man's face instantly darkened and he immediately turned to leave. After offending me, you still want to leave unscathed? Aren't you looking down on me, Yu Haoran? Looking at the brawny man who had turned to leave, Yu Haoran, who had transformed into a large power King Kong ape, said with a cold smile. Prince Consort Ma, can you give face to the Lu family of Feng City and let me live? To be able to transform into a large power King Kong ape and take the initiative to shout out his name, the brawny man, who already knew of Yu Haoran's true origins, finally stopped and turned around to beg. The face of the Lu family. Hearing that the other party was from the Lu family of the Feng City of the Emperor Qin, Yu Haoran was stunned for a moment. Immediately after, boundless anger gushed out from his heart. After all, who in the entire great Emperor Qin didn't know that he, Yu Haoran, was a lawless person who did as he pleased? After knowing his true identity, he still dared to use the family behind him to threaten him. How could Yu Haoran not feel angry? Today, even if your Lu family's quasi-martial Saint Realm ancestor personally descends, I will still turn him into the nourishment of this 10,000 acres of peach blossoms. Prince Consort Ma, if my Lu family's face is not enough, then I wonder what the Empress Dowager's face is. Yu Haoran's contempt for the Lu family caused endless resentment to emerge from the brawny man's heart. However, he knew that with Yu Haoran's strength and status, he really wasn't afraid of the Lu family, so he immediately brought out an even stronger backer. Originally, if you could obediently kneel down and kowtow to admit your wrongs, perhaps on account of meeting an old friend in a foreign land, I would have let you live. Seeing that the brawny man had actually brought out the purple-clothed woman who had once humiliated him and caused him to let Qin Baijun go in the end, an uncontrollable terrifying killing intent directly enveloped the brawny man. Now, you actually dare to use that shameless woman who has disgraced the royal family to threaten me. It seems that I have no choice but to kill you. Yu Haoran, shut up. Even though he was locked onto by Yu Haoran's terrifying killing intent, the brawny man still shouted angrily. The Empress Dowager is still a close elder of my Lu family. I absolutely cannot tolerate you ruining the reputation of a close elder like this. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.